Chapter 247. Natha slowly got up. She thought that Roddy would show some surprise or approval, but when their eyes met, she found that there was an inexplicable sigh in his eyes. "I will teach you what I know, as long as you are willing to learn." Roddy had said the same thing before, but this time he seemed to be quite serious. He paused for a second, and his eyes swept across Natha's body. He frowned and said, "Your leather armor is not suitable. Go and measure it. I will get you a more suitable set." In fact, this kind of request was a little sensitive for girls, but Roddy at this time, because he had stayed up for a long time and his EQ was basically close to zero, he did not take this into consideration at the moment. Natha slightly twitched the corner of her mouth at this request. She pursed her lips and replied, "No need, this set is good. This is not a suggestion. I have already begun to teach you something." Roddy's tone became a little stiff. "If you want to survive on the battlefield, having a good set of equipment is as important as having a good set of skills. Do you understand?" Natha opened her mouth. She never had this concept in her mind. Equipment? As long as it can keep warm, is there a difference? If it was in the past, Natha would definitely ignore this matter and turn around to leave. But at this time, she silently lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Understood." Roddy swallowed his saliva. Seeing his mentor being so humble, the strange feeling in his heart made him very uncomfortable. He always felt that he was going to be reprimanded in the next second. Damn, the psychological shadow is too heavy. He sighed and pointed to the parts of Natha's body that needed to be measured. He said, "Here, here and here. Go and measure them first, then tell me the size." Before Natha could answer, the bedroom door was knocked again. The two turned at the same time and found Akasha standing there with a dinner plate in her hand. The holy priest's face was still a little pale, but after a night of recovery, the side effects of continuous consumption of potions had basically disappeared. She walked in with a smile, only to see Roddy pointing his finger at Natha's chest. This scene caused Akasha's expression to freeze. She stopped in her tracks and then looked down at the ground. She didn't know whether to leave or not. She said awkwardly, "Roddy, breakfast is ready." "I'll bring it up." Akasha was originally in a good mood, but she felt that she seemed to have encountered something that she shouldn't have, and her heart was inexplicably confused. Natha was a wood elf, sure enough, men like this legendary race. Oh, just put it there. Because Akasha was usually a little timid, Roddy did not notice her abnormality. He pointed to the table and said to Natha, "Don't forget what I said." Natha nodded obediently and turned to leave. Akasha was almost scared. She knew Natha very well. This wood elf was like a block of ice in the past. Why did she become so obedient in front of Roddy now? Her hand holding the dinner plate tightened. Akasha and Natha brushed past each other, but the two did not even make eye contact. After putting the food on the table, Roddy's voice sounded in Akasha's ears. "Didn't I tell you to have a good rest? Why did you get up so early again?" Although this tone was a little reproachful, Akasha understood that Roddy was concerned about her. This made her somewhat sour mood immediately improve. She lowered her head and replied, "I couldn't sleep well. When I woke up, I found that you hadn't slept, so, thank you." Roddy picked up the cheese and took a bite, vaguely thanking her. This manor had been abandoned for a long time, and no one in the town came out to sell things. So breakfast came from the Lord's hands. Roddy was not used to the sour taste of the cheese, but in order to replenish his energy, he had no other choice. He picked up the piece of bread next to him and handed it to Akasha, motioning for her to sit on the chair. "Sit down and eat. I have something to ask you." Akasha could not refuse, so she took a small bite. In her heart, she was thinking about what Natha and Roddy were doing just now. She held the bread with both hands and imagined a lot of images that made her ears burn. Roddy did not know what Akasha was thinking. He rubbed his dark eyes and whispered, "What's with that scroll?" The appearance of the death coil was witnessed by many Templars. This led to Roddy making up a bunch of messy reasons to avoid it. The general idea was that the Templar was an undead, and he took the potion and death coil or something like that. Fortunately, the Templars did not know necromancy, and Akasha could cast divine incantation. So in the end, they did not associate Akasha with necromancy and believed Roddy's words. But Roddy himself knew that it was not that simple. Akasha, who was lost in her imagination, was stunned by the question. She quickly raised her hand and said, I don't know what that scroll is. When I tore it, the ring you gave me suddenly lit up, and then the spell was cast. At that moment, it felt different from casting divine incantation, but there were some similarities. Roddy narrowed his eyes when he heard that. Without saying anything, he took off the ring on Akasha's finger and carefully examined it. The brief contact with his fingertips made Akasha's face turn red. She bit her lips and looked up slightly. However, she only saw Roddy's frowning face as he held the ring. She did not know what to think of, but she lowered her head again and tried to suppress her slightly rapid breathing. What's wrong with you? Roddy was seriously sleep-deprived. When his eyes moved away from the property panel of the ring, his brain could not think about anything else. He thought that Akasha was sick, so he reached out and touched her forehead, muttering, "A little hot, but not a fever." "I'm fine." Akasha's voice was as soft as a mosquito. She felt that her head was fine, but after he touched it, she was a little dazed. "If you're fine, rest more. After eating, go back to sleep. I'll call you if there's anything." Roddy put the ring back in Akasha's hand. The beautiful priestess tactfully got up and left. Before leaving, she hesitated for a long time and plucked up her courage to say, "Roddy, don't tire yourself out." Akasha plucked up all her courage to say this sentence, but Roddy was distracted and did not hear it clearly. Oh, okay, no problem. Go and rest." After he finished speaking, he turned his head and began to write something, obviously absent-minded. Akasha remembered the scene when Natha looked here before. She had a feeling that Roddy was thinking about that wood elf. Her heart suddenly felt sour, and she pouted and walked away. At this time, Roddy still did not notice Akasha's state. His attention was completely attracted by the words, "soul binding," on the ring. Soul binding generally appeared on high-grade equipment above the epic grade. Once it was bound, it could not be used by others even if they had it. However, equipment with this attribute was often priceless, and it could not even be seen in the auction house. Only the top teams could obtain it in the raid group dungeon. How can white equipment be bound? Are you kidding me? Roddy muttered to himself and reached out to write down this matter on the parchment. He was afraid that his brain would not be able to process all this, so he had already sorted out all the things that needed to be dealt with. At this time, the letters to Angmar, Benjamin, and even Rubens had already been written, and the other things that needed to be dealt with included resource reorganization, winter training plan, weapon enhancement plan, knight armor improvement plan, Elsa village improvement plan, and a lot of other things that needed to be dealt with. He wrote Soul Binding Ring under the title of Necromancy Scroll Investigation. He stuffed the rest of the bread into his mouth, yawned hard, and rubbed the corners of his eyes. When he heard footsteps coming from outside the house again, he turned his head and said, "I'm almost done with what I need to do. I'll leave the rest to you." It was Sodeler. After a short rest, his spirit was much better than Roddy's. The high morale brought by the overall victory made the Baron feel like he was full of energy. He held a smoked sausage in his hand and chewed it as he said, "I've rested well. What do you need me to do now?" "Don't always act like you're an errand boy. Didn't I say that you're a lord? Do what a lord should do." Roddy yawned again. "Fighting a war is fun, but dealing with the aftermath is really troublesome. Although we have gained the most, the things we have to face have also increased. By the way, I might make a trip to Hollier in a few days." "For what? To collect rewards?" "Yes. Let's see what they can give. I hope it's not some empty title." Roddy sorted out the letters and gave them to Sodaler. It's just a rough plan. You're more meticulous than I am. See if there's anything to add. Sodaler and Roddy had been comrades for a long time. With this kind of trust, there was no need to be polite. He reached out and nodded. I'll do my best to take care of the territory. But next, focus on developing and building up your strength. Roddy let out a heavy breath. We'll talk about it after winter is over. I'm really tired. Leave the rest to me. Sodaler nodded. His and Roddy's division of labor had gradually become clear as the family business increased. Roddy was in charge of the overall strategic direction and combat decisions. In the past 6 months, Roddy's decisions had not been wrong, which still showed his ability in this area. Other than that, all other matters were managed by Sodaler, so his actual power was actually much greater than Roddy's. But Sodaler did not have any other thoughts about this. He knew very well that Roddy's vision and strength were probably far beyond the territory of Ifta and even beyond the kingdom of Karen. Carter has already taken people to the town. Within 3 days, Gig Town will return to normal, but there may be more nobles coming later. The guards on guard will start patrolling at noon today. Sodaler briefly described his arrangements. Regarding such details, Roddy was reassured to leave it to him. After thinking for a while and confirming that he could finally rest, Roddy reached out and gathered the books and parchments on the table together. He carried them and walked to his bedroom. I'm going to sleep. Call me if there's anything important. He took a few steps back to his bedroom and threw the things in his arms on the table. Just as he was about to lie down on the bed, he caught sight of the thick tome that Brody had given him. He walked over and flipped open the cover page. The High Elves' self-awareness of a defense system appeared before his eyes. The signature at the bottom was very simple. There were no complicated titles or positions. It was just the ordinary name of Karthika. Chapter 248. Roddy naturally did not know what the name Khadgar represented. Perhaps the answer was in this book, but he really did not have the energy to read it. He closed the book and forced himself to take off his coat. The moment Roddy fell onto the bed, he immediately fell into a deep sleep. This was probably the most peaceful sleep Roddy had had in a long time. Winter had arrived, and Roddy was not worried at all that there would be a large-scale battle. The harsh cold was an extreme condition for any race. From 590 to 597, there had not been a single war that broke out in the kingdom during winter. Even when the Beastmen invaded, the winter was also a truce. In this era, the cruelty represented by the harsh cold was something that modern people who were exposed to air conditioners every day could not understand. After Roddy fell asleep, Kyger Town welcomed the first snow of the winter. The cleaning work outside the town was almost complete. The corpses were cleaned up, and the wounded were gradually evacuated. Commoners began to walk around the town. They met each other and immediately began to share everything they had seen in the battle. Rumors about the battle also quickly spread in the town. Because Roddy had fought a guerrilla warfare and a siege and annihilation battle, there were a lot of eyewitnesses who had seen everything through the cracks of the window. In the eyes of those eyewitnesses, what excited them was not the siege and annihilation battle at the crossroads, but the archer who single-handedly forced hundreds of infantry to retreat. Speaking of which, in this era where information was not developed, the deeds of heroes and knights were always something that the masses loved to see. So, almost overnight, there were at least 20 versions of the powerful archer's story. I saw him jump onto the roof with my own eyes and shoot 3 people to death, 1 arrow for one. His arrows can emit blue light. He shot through 3 people with 1 arrow. A cavalry regiment that came later was scared half to death when they saw him. The leader even fell off his horse. I heard that this guy isn't human. He seems to be a wood elf from the forest. At first, the information was still reliable, but later, all kinds of details were gradually added. The biographies like Dragon Lance Knight or Dragon Slayer Trilogy were very popular, so it was not surprising that these illiterate people described Roddy as a monster with 3 heads and 6 arms who could breathe fire. On the other hand, Roddy didn't feel any pressure at all. On the 13th of November, after changing into a thick leather coat and getting someone to cut his hair short, Roddy walked on the streets of the town. No one associated him with the god of slaughter. I owe you. Roddy rubbed his slightly swollen eyes, pulled his hood tight, and slowly walked through the snow-covered streets. After a long time, he came to a bar, looked up at the sign that said Wild Rose, pushed the door and walked in. There was no heat wave or deafening noise that he had imagined. After it snowed, the people in the town didn't like to come out, so there were fewer customers in the bar than usual. The fireplace was burning brightly, and the sound of conversation echoed in the wooden hall, but it was not noisy. Roddy tightened his leather coat, went straight to a table and sat down. He looked at the 2 people who had been sitting here for a while, took off his hood and said, "How's your injury?" "With the help of potions and priest Akasha, I've recovered." The one who answered Roddy was Buffon, the skinny mercenary with a face full of obedience and admiration. Fatty Henry next to him was the same. He looked at Roddy's young face and guessed that Roddy might be younger than him, but in terms of ability, he was much weaker. "That's good. How's the information I asked you to search?" "From yesterday to now, I've roughly sorted out these." Henry and Buffon were the local bullies. If he wanted to consult the town, he would naturally look for them first. After listening to the 2 talk about the current situation of Gigtown, Roddy began to arrange the next task. He did not forget to take out a bag in his hand. This is the previous commission, and the compensation for the accidental attack. These are separate matters. Everything will be done according to the agreement. Henry and Buffon originally nodded and thought about how to do the task that Roddy arranged beautifully. As a result, they were dumbfounded when they saw the bag of money in Roddy's hand. The fatty who reacted quickly immediately got up and respectfully pushed the bag of silver coins back. "Sir Roddy, our lives have been saved by you twice. In the future, if there is no other request, we will do whatever you want us to do, but please don't give us any more salary." Henry's expression was extremely sincere. A week ago, he was still thinking about whether or not to get some benefits from the task, but now he really did not have any other thoughts. "Just give us some food to eat. You are a person who can do great things, we know." This was the eyesight of a mercenary. Buffon was simply grateful, but Henry could see that Roddy was extraordinary from this incident. Not to mention that the battle was full of tricks and tricks. Wellington and Titus personally came to rescue them, and could even command the Knights Templar. How could this be done by an ordinary person? Roddy did not look surprised, but he did not keep the bag of silver coins. Instead, he raised his hand and took out 2 contracts. "If it is according to what you said, then sign this contract. But the money is still the reward, and it is also what you deserve." After saying this, Roddy put on his hood again. "Remember those tasks. I still have something to do, so I will go first." Leaving behind Henry, who wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought, and Buffon, who continued to be dull, Roddy pushed open the door of the bar and disappeared from sight. The 2 people who stayed in the bar looked down at the contract. It was a long-term contract with a time limit of 30 years. It sounded like a contract to sell oneself, but the conditions were good, the salary was extremely high, and there was even a vacation. Buddy, this contract. To be honest, Buffon had never seen such a contract. The contracts in this day and age were basically a few sentences, and there was no one who wrote it in such detail. "Sign it." Henry quickly understood that this was Roddy's style of doing things. No ambiguity, clear definition, and clear distribution of responsibilities. When it was time to use you, don't look for excuses, and when it was not time to use you, you can rest however you want. Then this money, keep it. Henry reached out and took the bag of money in his hand. His meaning is very clear. We will earn as much as we put in the effort. Not a penny more, not a penny less, understand? Buffon nodded, listening to the sound of the silver coins clattering in his ears, but he still could not help but swallow his saliva. He had never made so much money in his life. But before the two had time to say anything else, the door of the bar was pushed open, and the originally quiet hall immediately changed because of the noisy shouting. "The damn weather is too cold, Tyrion, hurry up and serve the wine. Get up, don't you know me? I like this seat." 4 or 5 guys dressed as mercenaries approached the bar, first driving away the people around the fireplace, then began to hold the glass of ale, their mouths full of dirty words. When they saw people looking at them with indignant eyes, they shouted arrogantly, "What are you looking at? Do you believe that I will kill you?" People who had been in Gigtown all year round knew that these guys were members of the Wolverine Mercenary Corps. If the mercenary corps in the town were to be ranked, this mercenary corps would be the strongest. They had a large number of people, good equipment, and controlled nearly half of the task quota in the town. In the past, the Wolverine Mercenary Corps had been developing healthily, but in recent years, the dominant situation made the members of this mercenary corps become more and more arrogant. Before this, Viscount Tranca controlled the various interests and the right to speak in the town, so these members were simply arrogant. But recently, after the town fell into a masterless state, this mercenary corps began to openly and covertly devour some of the interests that used to belong to the nobles, and because of this, they became more courageous. In this era, relying on force was the mainstream, after all. The other mercenary corps in the town generally did not dare to provoke them, so in the end, this situation of, when the tiger is not in the mountain, the monkey is king, was created. Henry turned his head and glanced, and one of them happened to notice his gaze. After taking a closer look, he sneered, "I heard that the Iron Horse Mercenary Corps is dead. Why are you still alive? Where's that pretty girl in your corps? Our boss is still waiting to have a taste. Don't tell me she's also dead?" The Iron Horse Mercenary Corps had been cancelled from the Mercenary Guild. People in the information trade naturally knew this, but obviously, they did not care at all. Instead, they gloated and laughed at them. Buffon was provoked by these words and immediately stood up to say something, but he was stopped by Henry. "Why are you so excited?" Buffon gritted his teeth. The death of comrades was a taboo in the trade, and no one wanted to joke about it. These guys in front of him were obviously here to find trouble. Fatty Henry narrowed his eyes and did not speak. It was common for mercenaries to be brave and fierce, and it was not uncommon for them to fight because of a disagreement. If it was in the past, he might have pulled Buffon and directly chopped them up, but when he looked at the 2 contracts, his mind was clearer than ever. After knowing Roddy, Henry's vision had been raised a lot. The pattern that was limited to Gigtown in the past had unknowingly and completely changed. Now, he and Buffon were thinking about how to help Roddy take over this territory. Compared to this goal, the Wolverine Mercenary Corps could only be called a small fight. Insult? After the matter was settled, they could casually use some connections to crush this group of guys to death. Now that they were showing off their bravery, they would be at a disadvantage. "Let's go, we still have business." Fatty shook his head at Buffon, got up and left directly. "You still haven't answered my question? Is that pretty girl still alive? Don't run." The ridicule of the mercenaries behind them became more and more unbridled, but seeing that Henry and Buffon did not respond at all, they felt that it was meaningless. They turned around and scolded, "2 cowards. In the past you still know how to talk back, but now you are so cowardly. TSK, ignore them. What's Lord Leader's plan recently? These few days, aren't they making a fuss about the ownership of the town? Anyway, no matter who takes over, Leader is prepared to extort a sum of money from them. Our Wolverine Mercenary Corps is not a pushover. Even Taranka has to give face. If it was someone else, we would also have to give face. Chapter 249. Serene of the leather shop had reopened the door of the shop. The arrival of winter gradually slowed down the business, but Serene was still open for business. After all, it was better to take some leather armor repair business than nothing. More importantly, after Viscount Tranca's death, Gigtown was now in a state where no one urged him to pay taxes. Compared to the high taxes in the past, he was naturally willing to take advantage of this period to earn more money. Of course, Serene was more concerned about the whereabouts of Roddy. 3 days had passed since the day Roddy entered the leather shop and fought, but Serene's heart still could not calm down. When he went to the tavern to buy wine 2 days ago, he naturally heard the people talking about the legendary sharpshooter. Serene was not stupid. He was almost sure that the guy was Roddy. Although the sharpshooter, in people's words, was unbelievably powerful, Serene could infer what Roddy had done from just a few words and everything he had seen alone. He led hundreds of infantry away, trapped in the enemy's formation, but took the initiative to create an opportunity to surround and annihilate the enemy, breaking through the encirclement and successfully killing several times the enemy's number. Such a thing would only be sung by bards in the past, but now it was a fact that everyone could see. Sitting in the shop, Serene's eyes kept involuntarily looking at the window next to him. The mark left by Roddy's arrow on the wooden frame was very clear, and the intensive sound of the bowstring still seemed to be echoing in his ears. Did he kill Earl Owen? The enemy from many years ago was killed just like that. Until now, Serene still had a surreal feeling. That was a real Earl. How could he just kill him like that? Creak! The wooden door was pushed open, and a fierce-looking mercenary walked in with muddy feet, shouting loudly, "Where's the shorty? Come out. We have business." Serene was behind the counter. Even though he was not tall, the mercenary could definitely see him, so his shout was obviously sarcastic. The cobbler frowned and finally replied in a somewhat stiff tone, "I'm here." Clang! A pile of leather armor was thrown in front of Serene. 16 pieces of leather armor. Repair those that need to be repaired. Deliver them within a week. The mercenary didn't give Serene any face at all. His tone sounded like he was ordering a servant around, but Serene could only grit his teeth and bear it, because this guy was a member of the Wolverine mercenary group. This was the reality. Since one did not have enough trump cards to fight against such a tyrannical fellow, the only way to live in peace when facing such a tyrannical fellow was to swallow one's anger. Although the Wolverine mercenary group was not arrogant enough to kill people wantonly, Serene knew that the only outcome of provoking them was the closure of his shop. Fight back. Other than cursing a few times to satisfy his craving, he probably couldn't even beat this guy in front of him. Same old rules. If you want to repair it, you'll need a deposit of 3 silver coins. Suluan said in a low voice, trying hard to suppress his anger. Shorty, are you stupid? The mercenary pointed at the Wolverine mercenary group emblem on his chest. Look at this. Are you negotiating with me? 3 silver coins. Suluan's stubbornness rose. He glared at the guy in front of him. It was like this in the past. The past is the past. Now that there's no one collecting taxes in Kegtown, we're the ones collecting it. It doesn't matter who collects it. If you don't even understand the rules, your shop is going to be closed soon. The mercenary knocked on the counter and threw a handful of copper coins. Our leader is taking care of your business. Don't be so shameless. The copper coins that fell on the counter made Suluan's face turn red. This kind of poor-quality copper coins could only be exchanged for 1 silver coin, and this handful of copper coins was only worth 8 copper coins, which was less than the price of 1 silver coin. The 3 silver coins that Suluan asked for was only a deposit. It would normally cost around 9 silver coins to repair all of them, so these 8 copper coins were basically used to make beggars eat. This kind of behavior was really too much. Suluan's lips trembled in anger. He was about to scold the mercenary, but he was interrupted by the door that was pushed open again. He turned his head, but the words that he wanted to say stopped abruptly. The hooded Roddy walked into the shop. When he saw Suluan, he greeted him calmly, "We meet again." His gaze lingered on the mercenary beside him for a moment, and then he said, "Don't worry about me." After that, he strolled around alone, looking extremely leisurely. This feeling was exactly the same as when he shot arrows outside the window a few days ago. He just stood there calmly, but Suluan felt a kind of pressure. Not only him, but even the mercenary from the Wolverine mercenary group also felt this. This guy didn't know Roddy's identity. He seemed to want to say something, but he paused and finally turned to Suluan again. "That's all. Do as you see fit." I said, 3 silver coins. Suluan originally wanted to compromise, but when he saw Roddy standing beside him, he suddenly felt a surge of courage in his heart. He unexpectedly pushed the copper coins back and forced the mercenary to stop. "Shorty, say that again?" Before Suluan could speak, the mercenary grabbed the copper coins and threw them at him. "You don't want to keep this shop, do you?" Suluan leaned back and the copper coins hit him. It hurt a little, but when he saw the mercenary's angry face, he felt an inexplicable sense of pleasure. Earl Owen's death had made him more courageous. Roddy originally didn't want to meddle in other people's business, but when he turned around, he found that he had to intervene, because the mercenary directly pulled out his sword and slashed at Suluan. This gave Roddy a headache. Suluan couldn't die. This special NPC was much more useful than the general grocer. So he immediately pulled out his sword and easily deflected the mercenary's short sword. Then he looked at the mercenary in front of him and said, "Don't you think you've gone too far? Who are you? Do you know who I am?" The mercenary shouted loudly after the short sword was deflected, but there was a hint of fear in his eyes. He originally just wanted to cut a mark on the counter to threaten Suluan, but Roddy's casual block made his hand hurt. As a mercenary, he immediately became vigilant. Although his words were unforgiving, in his heart, he already had the intention to retreat. "I don't know." Roddy shrugged. "But if you want to cut people, I won't agree." "Fine, just you wait." Like a gangster on the street, the mercenary knew that he was no match for Roddy, so he wisely chose to retreat. But when he looked at Suluan, he pointed at the shop and said, "You can continue to open the shop if you can." Suluan spat and watched as the mercenary picked up the leather armor and left, his eyes full of disdain. The mercenary stomped his leather boots and walked out as if to show off. But before he could leave the shop, a figure walked in and stopped him. Natha silently walked into the shop. She was wearing a thick fur cloak and a hood that covered the pointy ears unique to the wood elves. Her mouth was also covered with a scarf. Although half of her face was covered, anyone with normal vision would be able to tell that Nada's face was so beautiful that it could bring calamity to a nation. The mercenary who was about to leave the shop froze on the spot and stared at Natha. The wood elf didn't even look at him. She walked to Roddy and whispered something to him. Then she quietly stood to the side like a follower. The scene made the mercenary swallow his saliva. He looked up at Roddy and sneered as he left the leather-making shop. Roddy, who was aware of all this, did not respond because he had no interest in paying attention to such an insignificant character. He turned to Suluan and asked curiously, "What's that guy doing here?" "He's from the Wolverine mercenary group. He's been getting more and more outrageous after Tranka's death. He said he wants to collect taxes for the nobles, as if they're lords." Suluan didn't know Roddy's exact identity. He only vaguely knew that Roddy was related to the famous Baron Sodeler. But the two of them didn't really talk much, so his complaints were unintentional. Roddy thought it was interesting. He looked out the door thoughtfully and asked, "You didn't have to provoke him just now, did you? Isn't it a little inappropriate to open a shop like this?" Business is business, not to be someone else's pig or dog. If they continue like this, I'll quit. Suluan thought of that guy's face and said hatefully, I've swallowed my anger for so many years. If this goes on, I'm afraid people will only look at me like a turtle." As Su Luen spoke, he took out Rhodey's armor pieces, placed them on the counter, and asked, "Here they are. There is one thing I want to ask. Did you kill Earl Owen?" "Yes." Roddy nodded. "He was the necromancer's lackey. Baron Sodeler killed him on the battlefield." Su Luen took out another bag and pushed it to Roddy. "I've collected some rare leather materials over the years. Now that I think about it, they're actually useless. Take them with you." Seeing Roddy's shocked expression, Su Luen said bluntly, "I have a grudge against Owen, and now I've avenged him. I don't have anything else, but these materials should be able to help you make good equipment." Only then did Roddy understand why Su Luen did this. He casually flipped through the quest panel, and saw that there was indeed a quest related to Su Luen with the word, "completed," written on it. Feeling at ease, he took the bag and opened it. A sea of blue words instantly dazzled his eyes. These were all excellent materials, and they had all been processed by Su Luen. In other words, he could make some leather armor with these materials and make top-grade equipment that could enhance the effect of his skills. And it would not be inferior to those lizard skins. This was definitely something Roddy did not expect. He was stunned for a moment, but then he looked up and asked, "Have you ever thought of establishing a long-term partnership with me?" He reached behind him and took out the elven fruit wine that he had prepared. "There will be better pay, more supplies, and more wine." "Oh? Is it under Baron Sodeler's management?" Su Luen was actually a little confused. He was not very interested in making leather goods. He only saw it as a skill to support his family. Hearing Roddy's words, he was a little indifferent. After all, as a citizen of the territory, his fate was to struggle to survive under the protection of various lords. This was something that all civilians could not avoid. But he did not expect that Roddy would give him an unexpected answer. "No, if you are willing to cooperate, then I will manage it." Chapter 250. The 15th of November, Hollier City. The first winter snow had gradually melted, and the temperature had dropped a lot. The hustle and bustle in Hollier City had gradually calmed down. Every household had piled up firewood for the winter, stored food, and prepared to enter a state of hibernation like a grizzly bear. Even in the wealthiest city, there would be tramps and beggars who froze to death every year. Even the powerful Lord Duke had to resist the erosion of the cold. These days, Angmar had been coughing badly, but the continuous good news made him suppress the pain in his body. Tisk Tsk. Killing Earl Owen, expelling Durante, and sending away Howard and those guys who wanted to fish in troubled waters. This is not something that can be done with just a few words. At the sumptuous banquet, Angmar said to Bishop Benjamin, who was sitting opposite him, "The point is, this kid is still unwilling to accept the title of nobility, and insists on continuing to be his scout captain." What a headache! Benjamin did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said helplessly, "I'm already surprised that he could kill Magda, but to be able to take advantage of the situation to remove the few hard nails in the territory. This contribution is really meaningful to the kingdom." The kingdom? He's helping Iferta, who would care about the royal family. They're busy living a befuddled life and fighting amongst themselves. Do you know what the royal family replied to my letter about the orcs' attack? Angmar waved his hand and sneered. Just a piece of parchment with the words "handle it as appropriate" written on it. Ha, it must have been hard on them. Benjamin did not continue the conversation. As a religious member, he naturally did not want to get involved in Lord Duke's complaints about the incompetence of the king. Forget it, those guys are a wet blanket. Angmar tightened the thick blanket on his body. Every time this kid Roddy sends a message, it almost makes me think that the letter is fake. Leading 60 people to face an army of thousands, even when I was young, I probably would not have done such a thing. I heard, no one died in his army? There is indeed such a thing. When Wellington told me this, I think I will remember his expression for the rest of my life. How do you think Roddy did it? Angmar kept Benjamin guessing. When Benjamin could not figure out the answer, he took out a bottle from his pocket and handed it to him. Take a look. Healing potion? Of course, Benjamin knew about this kind of thing. He carefully examined the bottle and sniffed the remaining smell of the potion. Looks like it's an excellent quality, intermediate healing potion. Could it be that they... The old man suddenly thought of a possibility and was stunned. Every soldier who participates in the battle has 2 bottles, and it's said that there's also a bottle of stoneskin potion. Angmar laughed out loud. Just the value of these potions alone is enough to rebuild 2 similar troops. He's really bold to actually dare to use so many potions. I don't think there has ever been such an extravagant troop in the history of the kingdom. Benjamin sighed, but before he could answer, Angmar's gaze shifted towards him. I wonder how Rose Cross plans to reward him? The resources that I can use are limited. Don't expect me to bring out too many things. The bishop used his finger to spin the golden ring that represented his identity and said in a low voice, "The news has already been reported to Rubens. If the Holy Cathedral is not stupid, they should be able to understand his value." Old Duke did not smile after hearing this. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and said solemnly, "No matter how the church rewards him, I just want to say, don't continue to use him as a pawn." Benjamin was stunned. The greatest reward I can give him is to allow him to continue developing without restraint and control. Old Duke's expression was solemn, and he said in a very formal manner, "In the past, you and I could use him as a knife, we could let him stand at the forefront without any scruples, but after this, I will not do that. I hope that you will not do the same." Why, didn't you notice? Actually, when he did these things, he never expected us to help him much. From start to finish. He firmly grasped the initiative. Benjamin was silent for a while, and finally said in a low voice, "Of course I don't think that way, but the church's decision. This is only a suggestion, not a request." Angmar grinned. The original seriousness was swept away, as if he had not said anything before. Doesn't he want to be a noble? I think he just doesn't want to be a noble. Benjamin did not continue the topic and changed the topic. There's an interesting news from the south. It's related to the Pit Viper Cross. To be honest, I don't really care about the news of the pagans. I didn't intend to say it, but I guess you'll be interested in it. Benjamin lowered his voice. An executioner and his team were completely wiped out in Afta. This is a big blow to the Pit Viper Cross. The significance of the executioner to the Pit Viper Cross was almost equivalent to the 2 Guardian Knights by Angmar's side. The death of an executioner and a team like this was definitely not a small matter. But why did Benjamin tell him about this? His gaze froze and he asked, "Where in Afta did they go missing?" "The Silent Forest." Benjamin looked out the window and casually whispered, "At that time, Roddy was also in the Silent Forest." The 2 old men were smart. They understood what this meant in just a few sentences, but the more they understood, the more Angmar shook his head. "I'm afraid that the Rose Cross will make a big deal out of this. I'll do my best to support him." Benjamin sighed. The conflict between the 2 sects is getting more and more intense, and the Pit Viper Cross seems to be preparing for something big. There will probably be an investigation team coming here. I'll talk to Roddy. Angmar coughed twice and casually said, "Head, it doesn't matter, just make sure they don't return." Naturally, Roddy did not know that what he had done had such a deep impact. At this time, he had just returned to the manor's study, and was thinking of preparing to start crafting new equipment. Serene expressed that he would consider his offer, but Roddy did not expect him to follow him wholeheartedly. He happily gave Serene a month to consider, and at the same time, exchanged a bag of wine for a month's use of leather crafting tools. Originally, Serene had offered to help Roddy craft leather armor, but Roddy rejected him in the end, still preparing to work alone. With his current level of leather crafting, Serene was really only good enough to be Roddy's assistant, but Roddy knew that his energy was limited. He recruited Serene to become his personal leather crafting master. Serene's talent in leather crafting was unquestionable, and in 597, he had become a famous hidden leather crafting master. If he could use Serene for himself, it would be equivalent to solving the problem of updating his equipment. But for now, Roddy still had to rely on himself. In the study, Roddy placed the borrowed tools on the table one by one. Natha, who had been like an attendant all this time, stood behind Roddy. She had just completed Roddy's task of investigating the whole town. Logically speaking, after such a task, Roddy should have praised her, but he did not say anything. Instead, he raised his hand and said, "Give me your bow." Without a word, Natha raised her hand and handed over the short bow. Roddy pulled the bowstring, looked up, and asked, "Do you check your weapon every day?" Natha nodded. "Then you've checked for nothing." Roddy handed the bow back. "The bowstring still needs to be tightened 2 more times, and the position of the arrow platform is also slightly off. Adjust it now." Natha silently held the short bow and said in a low voice, "Yes, teacher." Roddy's fingers trembled a little, but he quickly got over it. Teaching was not an easy thing. Roddy had never been a teacher, so the only thing he could think of was to imitate the way Natha taught him. But obviously, this method was very stiff, and even seemed a little bullying, because for the next few days, Natha had to face extremely strict requirements and reprimands from Roddy all the time, not even a word of encouragement. "By the way, you were attacked in Urza village before. What was it?" He changed the topic. "A raven with red eyes." Natha removed the bowstring and adjusted the short bow according to Roddy's instructions. After saying this, she found that Roddy frowned and stopped his movements. "Where did you meet it?" "Wagra ruins." Roddy's expression became serious, and his originally relaxed mood became a little tense. "How did you deal with the body?" Natha recalled the big bird she had killed and said softly, "It rotted very quickly. In less than an hour, only some black feathers were left." "Blood raven. Summoning necromancer." Roddy frowned. "What does this mean? Exploring the high elf ruins? Could it be?" He suddenly remembered the letter left behind by Ansidin. Wasn't the city, Elson, drawn on the map a high elf city? And the recharging crystal that this guy was researching was just right in the Wagra ruins. Roddy's movement of tidying up the leather gradually slowed down. He silently weighed the information behind these pieces of evidence. Blood Raven was a unit that necromancers would only use for super long-distance reconnaissance. From his experience, the necromancer was probably still very far away from here. It was even possible that his real body was in the Tasman Kingdom. The biggest function of the Blood Raven was to record the scene in its eyes into the core of the undead in its body. But if the necromancer wanted to see it, it had to return to him. This meant that this dead Blood Raven could not send back the scene, so the necromancer had no way of knowing anything about the Wagra ruins. According to the nature of the summoning problem, the necromancer did not even know the fact that the Blood Raven had died. In short, Roddy still had enough time to respond. Recharging crystal. Elson, is this Augustine's goal? Roddy silently noted this extremely important information in his heart, but his hands continued to choose leather materials quietly. To put it bluntly, no matter who he wanted to face in the future, it was more important to be strong than anything else. At this time, he was making leather armor, and one of them was for Natha. Roddy checked Natha's status bar. After confirming that she had reached level 9, he asked casually, "What color leather armor do you like?" Natha was stunned. No one had ever asked her such a question since she was a child. She, who had always been indifferent, showed a rare look of hesitation. After thinking for a long time, she finally answered hesitantly, I don't know." Roddy looked up at Natha, but the silhouette of the iceberg teacher, in dark red leather armor, flashed in his mind. "It's okay, I know." Chapter 251. Although there was only a light snowfall, the temperature in Gig Town had dropped to -5 degrees Celsius within a few days like a roller coaster. The people who went out were trying their best to shrink their bodies into their cloaks, and each of them quickly shuttled through the deserted street. On the central street, the plants that grew due to Brody's spell had completely frozen to death, but because no one went to harvest them, they were now spread on the road like fallen wheat, stretching endlessly as far as the eye could see. Because there was still unmelted snow hanging on them, when leather boots stepped on them, crunch, crunch sounds could be heard. Leslie leisurely stepped on the vegetation as he walked through the street. He stretched out his hand to adjust the badge on his chest, and strode into a huge mansion on the side of the street. "Leader!" "Hello, leader!" The mercenaries in front of the door stood up to greet him, the servants bowed respectfully, and the people in front of him dispersed. This feeling of having hundreds responding to his call made Leslie quite proud. He straightened his back, and his mind recalled the girl who was under him last night, and he couldn't hide the pride in his heart. Those so-called nobles were nothing more than this. Leslie was the leader of the Wolverine Mercenary Regiment, with a base level of 18 and no advancement. It didn't sound high, but in a place like Gig Town, he was obviously already a figure at the top of a small pyramid. The mercenary regiment's station was very large, occupying a 3-story mansion and a sizable yard by itself. The entire mercenary regiment had an authorized number of 270 people, but in reality, there were less than 60 people in Gig Town. The rest of the members were either on duty or on a mission. At this time, it was winter, and there were more members on duty, so the station was not as lively as it used to be. But in Leslie's view, in the near future, this place would definitely be more prosperous. Because these days, he had secretly swallowed a lot of properties that originally belonged to Viscount Tranca. As long as he spent some time, the subsequent income would definitely roll in like a tide. Although the means were not honorable, and there was no skill, to put it bluntly, Leslie felt that it couldn't be more normal. Since no one was in charge of the town, couldn't he do it himself? Passing through the corridor and entering the conference hall, the room was decorated with swords and armors. No mercenary group could imitate a noble's heritage, no matter how hard they tried. The only oil painting hanging on the wall was a fake. But Leslie, who was a man of culture, did not care at all. He leaned back on the main seat and took a big gulp of ale from a servant. "Davy, how's the investigation going? I heard that they've been talking about a sharpshooter recently." "They are just deliberately mystifying things. Those rumors are not reliable at all." Deputy Commander Davy was a skinny man who excelled in archery. His archery skills were number 1 in Gig Town. That was why he scoffed at the sharpshooter, who slaughtered an entire infantry battalion, that the townsfolk spoke of. In Davy's eyes, the townsfolk's description was complete nonsense. How was it possible for someone to escape unscathed after attracting the firepower of more than 200 people and even counterattack? Please, can't you use your brain when you're making up stories? The only thing I can confirm is that there was indeed a guy with good archery skills at that time. He probably escaped after attracting the attention of some soldiers. I think he should be Baron Sodeler's subordinate. Sodeler, a new noble who just popped up, dared to take over Gig Town? It seems that his soldiers have suffered heavy losses. There are less than 80 of them left? When the war broke out, the Wolverine mercenary group was in a closed state and did not pay attention to what was going on outside. But after the war, they were quite quick to inquire about the news. It was just that they did not know the details of the battle. They had inquired about the cause and result of the matter, but they did not know the specific process. So in Leslie's imagination, Sodeler should have led at least 500 troops to defeat the Lords. In the end, both sides suffered heavy losses, and he was left with less than 80 people. The news has been confirmed. There are a total of 80 people left. I've already seen their people patrolling the streets today. It's quite serious. At this point, Davy's tone became somewhat teasing. Kigtown is not a deserted village. He's just a bumpkin who has just gained status. What right does he have to take over this place? Leslie's words made Leslie laugh out loud. But it was not too late. Davy then said in a low voice, I always felt that those patrolling fellows looked familiar. But after thinking for a long time, I finally remembered that I've seen them in Norland Village before. They're scouts from Norland Village. Leslie was stunned for a moment, but then he laughed even more unscrupulously. This new Baron is really good at bluffing. Scouts from Norland Village? That has always been the slogan of Good for Nothing. So, Davy shook his head and said disdainfully, if all his subordinates are at this level, I think I can make them scram in 3 days. Just give them a memorable lesson. Small nobles like them will probably be scared off after a little scare. Leslie crossed his legs high. After finishing the ale in his hand, he stuffed it into the maid's hand and touched the maid's butt. His gaze became abnormally lascivious. Go to the bedroom and wait for me. The maids in this mansion were all top-notch. Everyone knew about Leslie's lecherous nature, so their relationship with Leslie was obvious. The maid holding the cup bit her lip and turned around to walk to the bedroom. Davy knew that Leslie had something to do, so he tactfully got up and was ready to leave. However, a mercenary outside made him stop in his tracks. Leader, I have news to report. Leslie turned around and found that it was only one of his subordinates with no status. He casually asked a few questions, but who knew that the information that the other party brought would make his eyes instantly light up. You saw her in the leather shop? You haven't seen her before? This person was the mercenary who had spoken ruthlessly in Serene's shop. He knew that his leader had a preference for women, so when he found out that Natha was a peerless beauty, he immediately thought of using a borrowed knife to kill method. As long as Leslie's leader was moved, Serene would definitely be the first to be unlucky, and the guy who treated the beauty as his follower would definitely not escape Leslie's search. A powerful dragon cannot suppress a snake in its own land. He didn't believe that anyone would dare to challenge the Wolverine mercenary group in Kegtown. For those guys who looked strong, they could just call a dozen of their brothers and beat them up as they pleased. She's definitely a new face in town. She's wearing a scarf, but her face is definitely the most perfect I've ever seen. None of the noble ladies in Hollier can compare. Leslie was slightly tempted, but he didn't recklessly search for her. Instead, he waved his hand and said to Davy, You handle this matter. As long as you find her within 3 days, you will definitely be rewarded. After saying this, he asked again, By the way, where did the girl with the best figure from the Iron Horse mercenary group go? Davy was stunned for a moment and then he replied, I heard that the mercenary group was disbanded a few days ago. It's said that they went to the Silent Forest and suffered heavy losses. They're probably dead. TSK, TSK, TSK. What a pity. That girl's figure is really great. Just thinking about it makes me excited. Leslie sighed regretfully, but he reached out to untie his belt and walked towards the maid who had already taken off her clothes and was lying on the bed in the bedroom, November 16th. That book recorded all the information about Elson. I don't quite understand some of the content, but I believe that with your ability, you may be able to find some clues. At the edge of Kigtown, Brody, who was preparing to return to Elsa's village, once again emphasized this point to Roddy. He then reached out and grabbed the hide cloak Roddy had given him. That book is very important. That's why I made an exception to come here. Brody didn't explain too much. After all, any high elf book could be considered a priceless treasure. One of the reasons he could give this book to Roddy alone was naturally in the book, on the self-awareness of the defense system. Roddy hadn't read the book in detail yet, but after hearing Brody's words, he secretly noted it down in his heart. He planned to read it carefully when he got back. The gloomy sky showed signs of snow again. Roddy looked up and said, The second batch of resources will be sent to Elsa's village with the team. If necessary, I can provide craftsmen to build houses with fireplaces in the village. This will save a lot of trouble during the winter. Winter was very cruel to the wood elves. Every year, some elves would fall sick and die from the low temperature. Although the death rate wasn't as high as that of humans, the wood elves didn't have a large population to begin with. They couldn't afford to lose so many elves. Brody had also experienced the use of fireplaces in the past few days. He was immediately tempted. If possible, I hope to build some houses for the children. The wood elves were never pretentious. They immediately nodded in agreement. After a few words of greeting with Natha, they politely said goodbye and left the town under the escort of 20 people. After sending Brody off, Roddy and Natha prepared to return to the manor to continue making equipment. Making leather armor required a lot of energy and time. Roddy couldn't care about anything else these days. He didn't even leave the house for meals. Today, seeing Brody off was actually a way for him to take a breather. He was in a relaxed mood. The arrival of winter had slowed down many of his plans. It was rare for Roddy to have time to enjoy some peace. At this time, under the gloomy sky, he and Natha walked on the street one after the other. It felt like they were strolling on the road. Of course, this scene looked romantic, but in reality, it wasn't like that at all. Roddy didn't chat with Natha at all. He was just enjoying the cold wind while reminiscing about the days when he sat in a car and enjoyed the warm wind. He lamented in his heart about how backward this era was. However, such thoughts quickly disappeared. His mind was soon filled with plans again. Thinking about the workload of making 2 sets of equipment, Roddy's obsessive-compulsive disorder made him gradually quicken his step. However, he didn't walk far before a golden light suddenly lit up nearby. He stopped in his tracks. Akasha! Chapter 252. 5 minutes ago, Akasha was wearing a thick fur cloak and walking on the streets of Kyger Town. The daily life in the manor had been taken over by the maidservants Sodalar had hired, so Akasha had begun to focus on learning the High Elves' language. However, there was not much paper in the manor, so in order to record words, she had to come to the town to find Fatty Henry for help. Akasha did not want to trouble Roddy with such a matter, so she asked Carter for Henry's location. With her current status, such matters were naturally important to everyone. So when she arrived at the blacksmith's door, Fatty Henry had been waiting there for a long time, trembling with fear. "Reverend Akasha, what can I do for you?" He jogged a few steps and came up to greet them politely. Both of them used to be members of the Iron Horse mercenary group. This was the main reason why Akasha looked for him. She felt that it wouldn't be too awkward to talk to Henry. However, when she saw the fatty who used to be cheerful was now so reserved, Akasha also understood that the past could not be returned. She did not say anything else. Instead, she took out an exquisite purse and said to Henry, "I need to buy some parchment, but I'm not as familiar with the town as you are. After thinking about it, I think it's better to find you for this." "What do you mean?" Henry was shocked by the purse that Akasha took out and quickly pushed it back. "Just tell me how much parchment you need. This is completely unnecessary. Otherwise, if Lord Roddy finds out, I will not be able to bear the consequences." Others might not know, but Henry knew that Akasha and Roddy were very close. Although he could not see anything between the two, a man and a woman spending every day together, it was really hard to make a conclusion. Akasha sighed, and after refusing for a while, she had no choice but to keep the money bag. Henry secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to ask Akasha how much parchment she needed, he did not expect a strange voice to come from behind. "Hey, isn't this Henry? I heard that you went to the silent forest to seek death, but you came back alive?" Such an opening remark made the originally gentle Akasha frown, and Henry shut his mouth. He did not need to turn around to know who it was. "What? You think being Leslie's dog is cool? Henry turned around and looked at the guy in leather armor in front of him. He said in disdain, "It's not easy to work in the Wolverine mercenary group. I can't imagine how much flattery you had to do to get this leather armor, Luke." The mercenary named Luke's expression changed. He was an expert in bootlicking. He had been to all the mercenary groups in Kegtown, but he was kicked out without exception. Because everyone knew that he was good at bootlicking and nothing else. But now, he was wearing the uniform of the Wolverine mercenary group, and his arrogant words were obviously for a reason. "Let's find something to do before we close the shop and leave. To be honest, no one will stand up for you even if I beat you up now," Henry said, but he moved a few steps to block Luke's view. "Why don't we make a bet to see how many days of Leslie's salary you can eat?" These words made Luke choke, but he was obviously not here to bicker with Henry. This thievish-looking mercenary had long noticed Akasha beside him. At this time, he suddenly stepped aside and immediately shouted, "Our leader has been looking for you for a long time." Henry's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly knew what this bastard was here for. Everyone knew that Leslie was a lecher. Before the Iron Horse mercenary group left the Silent Forest, Akasha was used to wearing a veil. She knew that she was a fugitive, and rarely showed her face in public. But even so, she was still remembered by Leslie because of her curvaceous figure. Now it seemed that this lecherous mercenary leader was obviously ready to make a move. Fatty's brain worked quickly, and he almost immediately figured out the pros and cons. He immediately gritted his teeth and made a decision. He stepped forward and lifted his leg to kick Luke to the ground. He shouted angrily, "What the F***ck are you shouting for? You dare to kick me?" Luke was shocked and angry. He covered his chest and roared, "No one can run away from the woman our leader likes. If you dare to stop me, just wait for your death." He shouted as he struggled to get up. He did not forget to use both the carrot and the stick to say to Akasha, "Captain Leslie has always been very gentle to women. If you come with me, no one will make things difficult for you." Obviously, this mercenary leader did not know what it meant to pick up girls. The means he used were really simple, brainless, and violent. However, when Akasha looked at his ugly face, the first thing she felt was not fear, but amusement. After participating in several wars and witnessing miracles one after another, Akasha had no feelings for this ridiculous threat in front of her. Compared to lords like Magda, Ansedin, or Earl Owen, the status of the Wolverine mercenary group was completely insignificant. The patrol team can come and help. Captain Ruger is on duty today. Henry understood the situation clearly, so he only said this to Akasha. He turned around and kicked Luke to the ground for the second time. He said fiercely, "Who doesn't know what kind of person that bastard Leslie is? You really know how to lie through your teeth." Such a quarrel immediately attracted a lot of spectators. Akasha stood still and thought for a moment. Then she raised her hand and released a holy light spell into the air. Akasha's understanding of divine spells was far better than the average clergyman. Such an improved version of holy light spell was enough to let everyone in Gigtown see it and immediately attract the attention of the patrol team. Luke did not understand what he was saying because he was kicked to the ground twice. Wasn't Henry always a fat man who only knew how to giggle? Why did he suddenly become so tough? However, before the patrol team arrived, a group of people from the Wolverine mercenary group arrived first. They all saw Luke's embarrassing appearance and immediately drew their swords and surrounded Henry and Akasha. Luke turned over and spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva. He pointed at Henry angrily and said, "This guy hit me. Everyone, let's go. Beat him to death. You have no right to speak here." Deputy Commander David stood out from the crowd and scolded Luke until he was speechless. Raising his head, he narrowed his eyes and glanced at Henry. Then he turned a blind eye to Akasha and said, "Miss Akasha, I heard that the Iron Horse mercenary group has been cancelled. So, on behalf of the leader of the Wolverine mercenary group, Leslie, I welcome you to join at any time. If you are willing, the treatment and remuneration here are at least 3 times higher than the Iron Horse mercenary group. Can you consider it? When Akasha joined the Iron Horse mercenary group in Gigtown, she used a fake name of Kesha. So, David still did not know that her real name was Akasha. As for who was behind her, he had no idea. Obviously, in the eyes of the Wolverine mercenary group, she was just a weak and helpless girl. There was no doubt that David was very imposing. His behavior of ignoring Henry indirectly showed that he was superior to others. When he saw Akasha's stunned appearance, he was even more proud in his heart. He did not forget to calmly continue saying, "Let me introduce myself. I am the deputy commander of the Wolverine mercenary group, David." He thought that he would see the other party in awe and fear, but David realized that Akasha did not have any reaction at all. Akasha's gaze swept over the few self-righteous guys in front of her. She realized that she did not even think about the so-called countermeasures. She was more thinking about the polarized elements in the book The Essence of Energy. In other words, she subconsciously did not see these guys as a threat at all. "Henry, send the parchment I need to the manor as soon as possible," Akasha said to Henry, who was standing in front of her. From the beginning to the end, she did not care about David's question at all. This deputy commander's face stiffened and immediately turned the color of a pig's liver. After so many years in Gigtown, no one had ever ignored him like this. Chapter 253. I'll bring it over later. I'll be quick. Henry smiled as he answered Akasha's request. His previous restraint was nowhere to be seen. Davy didn't give up. He frowned and said, "Miss Akasha, I advise you to think about it, or else." Before he could finish his words, Akasha had already turned around and walked away. She didn't care about him at all. Davy's expression changed again. Even if he had a good temper, he couldn't stand being ignored like this. He immediately reached for the hilt of the sword at his waist. However, just as he was halfway through his action, an 8-man patrol team ran over under the guidance of the Holy Light spell. Davy didn't take these soldiers seriously at all. Instead, he shouted arrogantly, "The Wolverine mercenary group is on a mission. If you don't know what's good for you, get lost." At the same time, he didn't forget to turn his head and said to the people behind him, "No need to continue talking. Do it." The mercenaries responded and were obviously ready to drag Akasha away. This kind of kidnapping sounded absurd, but in the masterless Kygertown, the Earth Emperor Leslie had done many similar things. "What do you want to do?" Before they could take 2 steps, the bearded Ruger raised his hand and stopped them. The mercenaries heard his words and laughed loudly. Davy's face was even more ferocious. He pointed his sword at Ruger and said, "You are Soddler's men, right? Go back and tell him that anyone who dares to go against us will pay the price." "A bunch of bullsh*. T patrol team dares to yell at me?" He pointed at the deputy leader's emblem on his chest. "Do you see it clearly? If you don't want to die, run. Our leader wants that woman." Ruger was originally expressionless, but Davy's last sentence caused the expressions of him and the scouts behind him to change instantly. Every one of them had received treatment from Akasha on the battlefield. It could even be said that without her, half of the soldiers in this team would have died on the battlefield. With such kindness, the respect they had for Akasha was unimaginable. When Lu Gu heard these people saying that they wanted to harm Akasha, he immediately held onto the hilt of his sword. However, Davy didn't realize this. He cursed, "Get lost," and raised his leg to kick Lu Gu to the side. However, just as he took a step forward, he realized that he had picked on the wrong person to be unreasonable. Davy had never imagined that the 8 of them would be able to pull out their swords in such unison. When the sound of swords being unsheathed erupted, the vice leader of the mercenary group felt a chill in his heart. He instinctively felt the overwhelming killing intent. "This is fight!" Ruger roared angrily. Together with the scouts, they pounced on the mercenaries like ferocious tigers. Luke and the others originally wanted to fight in close combat, but they did not expect that they would be knocked down on the spot in just one move. Fortunately, Lugu said beat and not kill. Otherwise, this place would have been covered in blood. But even if they were holding back, when their strengths were not on the same level, such a duel would not have any suspense. "I won't let you go, bang. Leader, bang. If you guys continue to do this, bang." Seeing Davy howling in pain, Henry laughed unabashedly. Akasha, on the other hand, did not feel anything. She only looked from afar and sighed. Just as she was about to say goodbye and leave, she turned around and saw Roddy and Natha walking over. "Someone actually wanted to kidnap you on the street?" The surrounding onlookers were discussing this matter. Roddy only needed to listen to a few sentences to understand the ins and outs of the matter, so at this time, his tone was quite joking. "It seems that being too beautiful is also troublesome. I'll try not to come out." Akasha's expression was originally very calm, but after hearing Roddy's words, she immediately blushed and lowered her head. This was the first time she heard Roddy say that she was beautiful. She instantly forgot what she wanted to say and only stared at the ground shyly. "It's not wrong to be beautiful. I think it's just that these guys are sick." Roddy shook his head and looked at Davy, who was struggling to get up in the distance. He muttered to himself, "It seems that sometimes hiding too deeply is not a good thing." His team still had a long way to go. Keeping a low profile was to avoid trouble, but if there were always clowns like the Wolverine mercenary group, popping out to obstruct them, then it could only mean that Roddy was too low profile. This matter gave Roddy some new ideas about the development strategy. He secretly made a decision in his heart and then said goodbye to Lu Go. He turned around and asked Akasha to leave with him. "Shall we go back together? I just wanted to ask you something about divine arts." "Oh, okay." Akasha followed behind Roddy, her footsteps light and quick. Natha walked on the other side, her eyes coldly scanning the surroundings. After a few steps, she sensed something strange behind her. She turned around and saw that the deputy leader with 2 broken front teeth was staring at her with wide eyes. After just one glance, Natha indifferently looked away. She had no interest in dealing with such weaklings. Lu Gu and the others stretched their muscles and bones, sheathed their swords and continued patrolling. The unlucky guys who were beaten to the ground were left alone on the streets. "Go call for help! Call for help! I will definitely tear them to shreds!" Davy roared, but because of the anger, he directly fainted. What Roddy did not expect was that when he returned to the manor, Serene was actually waiting for him at the gate. "What's going on?" Roddy clearly saw that Serene's eyebrow had a wound that was still bleeding. His clothes were a little wrinkled, and he was carrying a bag on his back. He looked like a refugee who had lost his home because of a natural disaster. "I'm fine." Although he looked disheveled, Serene seemed to be in a good state of mind. He looked at Akasha and Natha behind Roddy, raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Last time you asked me if I was willing to work for you. I was still hesitating, but now I have no more room to hesitate." He shrugged and pointed to the bag on his back. "I'm here to seek shelter. Just give me some food." "Someone touched your shop." Roddy raised his eyebrows. "The Wolverine mercenary team?" Serene did not care at all. He smiled. "A bunch of good-for-nothings came to destroy my shop. I knocked out 2 of them and ran away. I've already packed up my things. I didn't lose anything." Although he said he didn't lose anything, the wound on his eye was not shallow at all. Roddy hurriedly asked Akasha to use recovery to heal him. This surprised Serene. Didn't clergymen only listen to the church? Why did Roddy have such a powerful and obedient priest under his command? He was really curious about Roddy's identity. He pointed to the manor and said, "This is Baron Sodeler's manor, right? Seems like you're his confidant?" Akasha looked at the dwarf with a strange expression, and then looked at Roddy. Her mouth wriggled for a while, but she finally closed it. Roddy did not explain too much. Sort of. We help each other and work hard for the same goal. Serene nodded, thinking that he had guessed correctly. But just as he was about to enter the manor, he saw Sodeler rushing back on horseback. Roddy raised his eyebrows. "You're back so early today?" Sodeler jumped off his horse and sighed. "Don't mention it. There was an accident during the negotiations today. A mercenary team sent people to mess things up. We couldn't come to an agreement on the mine." "The Wolverine mercenary team. You knew?" "No, I guessed." Roddy shook his head and then pulled Serene over to introduce him. "He's our exclusive leather maker from now on." Sodeler naturally knew that Roddy would not randomly find someone to chat with. He immediately smiled and greeted him. "Master Serene, I'm sure you'll be busy with the team's leather armor repair in the future. My name is Sodeler." "Huh!" Serene was about to answer, but he was completely stunned by the man's self-introduction. He was the Baron? Then why did he treat Roddy like this? Was Baron Sodeler not the Lord? Or was this Roddy the most well-hidden noble? Roddy naturally did not know what Serene was thinking. As they walked, he said, "Since you have nothing else to do today, I have some new ideas about the development of the territory. Do you have time to hear them?" Sodeler smiled bitterly and waved his hand. "I think it's better if you just give me orders like before. This kind of negotiating tone is really embarrassing." Ideas don't change, but how can the times change? Roddy patted Serene's shoulder and smiled. Who knows, maybe in the future, every commoner will be able to call the shots. Chapter 254. The dilapidated manor was only a temporary residence, so the grass inside the gate had not been cleaned. The atmosphere was desolate when they walked in. Inside the two-story manor, a small number of maids were pacing back and forth. When they saw Roddy and the others, they would respectfully greet them. Serene noticed that they called Sodeler Lord Baron and Roddy Lord Roddy. This also meant that Roddy did not have a noble title. For people born and raised in this era, the gap between commoners and nobles was not something that could be smoothed out with a few words. Serene had been a mercenary before. In his 7 or 8 years as a mercenary, he had seen all kinds of nobles. Some were arrogant, and some were arrogant. It wasn't that there were no good nobles, but he had never heard of any nobles who would lower themselves and chat with commoners. It was obvious that Roddy and Sodeler's relationship had broken Serene's habitual thinking. "What do you think of that mercenary group?" "Actually, we've already made preparations to deal with them a few days ago. We originally planned to close the net tomorrow, but we didn't expect them to play a trick today. It's a bit of a miscalculation, but it's not a problem." Listening to the two's conversation, Serene suddenly felt that the Wolverine mercenary group that he could not defeat was too pitiful. They had been arrogant in front of others, but in the eyes of Sodeler and Roddy, they did not even have the right to be opponents. Roddy was not in the mood to understand Serene's thoughts. He was very satisfied with Sodeler's answer. Clearly, this meticulous baron had already arranged everything. So, in the end, the long speech he had prepared was reduced to a simple sentence. "I won't ask about the specific methods, but the direction is very simple. Once our foundation is stable, we can be more forceful." Sodeler understood immediately. "Of course. Otherwise, we won't be able to handle the small fries coming to bother us every day." The two looked at each other and smiled. Their gay expressions made Surin's mouth twitch a few times. The group entered the conference hall. Natha went to her room to rest, and Akasha left first with the excuse of learning the High Elf language. Roddy had a maid take Surin to the guest room. After everyone left, Sodalar took out a few parchments and handed them to Roddy. This is about the results of the past few days. The rest is in the hands of that mercenary group. It should be done in 3 days. That's right. I can't do this kind of method of leaving a bunch of people hanging, beating them, and pulling them back. Roddy looked at the things recorded on the parchment and laughed. Looks like you are really suited to be the Overlord. These things give me a headache. Roddy had said this many times before. At first, Sodalar was not used to it. However, now that he thought about it, having someone do the work for him was much better than having someone do everything at the same time. If Roddy did all these things, how would he have the time to make leather armor? If Roddy were to do this, he would not have time to make leather armor. The town has calmed down. There are a few undead spies in the Potioneers Guild. I brought people to catch them yesterday. As for how to deal with them, what's there to say about those who betrayed their country? Roddy shook his head, his finger lightly brushing across his neck. TSK, I hate traitors the most. While they were talking, Surin had already returned. Roddy knew that the leathermaker had something to say to him, so he got up and said that he would go to the study on the second floor. Sodalar nodded, turned around and continued to study the map left behind by Anzadin. I know what you're curious about, said Roddy as he walked in front of Surin. I'm not a noble. Surin looked up in confusion. Then why? But I'm not a commoner either. In fact, according to my identity, I'm the leader of the Dukes of Angmar's scouting team. Roddy had no intention of hiding it. By chance, I saved Duke's life. That's why I have my current position and identity. He pointed behind him. Baron Sodalar is my subordinate. I think he's more suitable to be a noble than I am, so I gave him the title that Duke bestowed upon him. You're saying that you refused the noble title? Surin thought it was nonsense. If it were him, he would rather be beaten to death than give up the chance to be a noble. Yes. Roddy nodded and pushed open the door to the study. I know what I want, so I made my choice. In the study room, the crafting equipment was scattered on the table. Surin was originally thinking about the meaning behind Roddy's words, but when he saw the pile of materials on the table and smelled the unique smell of tanned leather, he immediately forgot about everything he had just seen. These materials. Are you making leather armor? Surin took a few steps forward and saw the neatly cut pieces of leather armor. He could no longer hide his surprise. When he wanted to make some equipment for Roddy, he was politely rejected. He thought that Roddy had gone to find a better leather maker, but he never thought that Roddy would make them himself. I made them. Are you interested in taking a look? Roddy casually asked. Suluan immediately nodded and said, All right. Surin, who used to be a mercenary, was not very interested in leather making. However, he had been in this line of work for a long time. He also had the title of the best leather maker in Geiger Town. It was inevitable that he would want to compete with Roddy. Roddy would rather make the materials himself than let Surin do it. This in itself was a hint. I can make things better than you. This made Suluan feel indignant. Although he admired Roddy's strength, he did not think that Roddy could surpass him in terms of leather making. Making equipment with leather was much easier than using metal to forge armor, but the simpler something was, the harder it was to make it well. Details were one thing, but the most important thing was the unique manufacturing method. Leather was just a raw material in the eyes of modern people, but in Earthbreaker, Magic Beast leather was far more than just raw material. To put it simply, a magic beast's hide was like a huge magic circle, and the cut hide was like pieces of scattered runes. When they were pieced together and made into equipment, it was equivalent to a runic reorganization. Whether each piece of leather could bring out its full potential depended on the leathermaker's skills in tanning, cutting, stitching, and other steps. If there was even the slightest deviation during the process, the effect of the whole equipment would be greatly reduced. Roddy's leather-making skill was at the top of the Grandmaster level, but that was only in the game. In today's real world, many pieces of leather could not be cut and stitched as easily as before without the assistance of the system. Therefore, what Roddy could make at present was only some simple and low-level equipment. But even so, when it came to making equipment of the current level, his level was still 30 times higher than Surin's. But the reason why Roddy wanted to rope Surin in was that he knew Surin's strength. This dwarf could not do anything else, but his tanning effect was far better than other leather makers. When a leather maker of the same level tanned leather, 40% of the magic effect of the leather could be retained at most, but Surin could increase this value to more than 75% because of his adventure. At the same time, he could give the leather the effect of magic mutation. When each piece of armor kit could be 30% more effective than ordinary armor of the same level, how much stronger would a set, made with dozens of armor kits be? Chapter 255. Surin did not have a clear idea of the power he possessed. The process of tanning leather did not have a horizontal comparison in an era when information was not developed. That was because craftsmen who made equipment and weapons usually stayed in one place for their entire lives. They did not have access to information, and most of the time, they even cherished their knowledge. Only a player like Roddy would choose the so-called best plan to make equipment after systematic research and comparison. As for the natives in the game, they probably never thought that a piece of equipment needed to be made by multiple people. Roddy was well aware of his own strengths and weaknesses. Although the stalker's suit that he had previously made was very powerful, the magical properties of the Chimera's beast scales were only 30% effective. The low level was one of the reasons, but the low tanning effect accounted for at least 70% of the magical properties. This was something that could not be helped because no leathermaker in the game was as special as Surin. If Surin had been the one to process the armor, the magical properties would have increased by at least 35% or more. Naturally, Surin did not realize this because apart from tanning, he was not better than Roddy in any other aspect, and he knew nothing about it. At this moment, Suluin reached out to pick up the wrist guard that had yet to be stitched up. He glanced at it and said, "The skin of a fire thorn iguana shouldn't be cut like this. If it's cut like this, the energy inside the skin will be disrupted. Isn't the suture a little too far outside? How can you use a reverse stitch here?" There was no special system for leather making. Almost every famous leather maker had their own unique opinions, and Surin was no exception. When faced with Roddy's half-finished product, the first thing he thought of was to nitpick. But Roddy, who stood behind him, did not argue. He only nodded and said, "You're right." Surin was puzzled. He thought that Roddy would be surprised and ask for the reason, but judging from his tone, it seemed that he already knew about it. Then why, before Surin could finish, there was a sudden knock on the door. He turned around and saw a heavily armed soldier standing at the door. His attention was immediately attracted, and he forgot what he wanted to ask. "Lord Roddy, there's a group of soldiers outside." Surin pricked up his ears, curious as to what kind of soldier would come looking for Roddy. However, he did not notice the inconspicuous, finished wrist guard among the pile of junk on the table. "Who is it? Looking for me?" Roddy asked casually. "It's Lord Angmar's team." This sentence caused Suluin's expression to stiffen. "Oh, what are they doing here? A letter?" "No, it's just an old man who claims to be Duke's butler. He said he's here to bring you to Hollyford." Such an answer made Surin choke. He had wanted to ask something, but his words were stuck in his throat because of the soldier's words. It's quite ostentatious. Roddy didn't look too surprised. He just nodded and said, I'll see him later. The soldier took his orders and left. Roddy then turned his attention back to serene. By the way, where were we? Speaking of leather-making techniques, your sewing technique is actually a little special, but I think it's still pretty good. Serene didn't dare to criticize Roddy like before. His tone had changed. Roddy naturally knew what he was thinking, but he didn't expose him. He just smiled and said, Everyone's way of making equipment is different. Let me finish this set of equipment and you can take a look at it. No problem. We'll talk about it later. Serene didn't take this to heart. He just thought to himself that it would be strange if Roddy did a good job. He forced a smile on his face and felt that Roddy's method was a little wasteful. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. While all this was happening in the manor, the Wolverine Mercenary Regiment was shouting about how to deal with Roddy. The dignified deputy leader was beaten up by the town's patrol team and thrown to the side of the road like trash. This was a complete humiliation to the Wolverine Mercenary Regiment. Moreover, the one who did all this was the town's newest ruler. This caused the mercenaries who thought highly of themselves to immediately unite against a common enemy. Catch them. Punish the murderer. What's there to be proud of for a lord who hasn't even grown his hair? He's all bark and no bite. I'm going to skin that bastard right now. Of course, there were soldiers who objected, but they were quickly drowned in the tide of criticism. Deputy Leader Davy had long lost his rationality due to anger. He had already ordered all the mercenaries who were currently on vacation in the town to prepare to attack the Baron's mansion. If it wasn't for the fact that he was heavily injured and couldn't go to the door, perhaps he would have already rushed up with his dagger. These bastards must pay the price. That's for sure. Rest well and leave the rest to me. Leader Leslie persuaded him with kind words. After the team gathers, I'll directly deal with them. We'll make our move in 3 hours. After hearing this, Davy lay back on his bed in satisfaction. When Leslie returned to his bedroom, his face had also turned gloomy. This was not a small matter. It basically meant that Lord Sodlet was irreconcilable with them. Next, his choice was very simple. Swallow this anger and compromise, or do everything in his power to force Sodlet to give in. If it was any other town, the mercenary regiment would not dare to go against the Lord. But in Gigtown, the power of the Wolverine Mercenary Regiment gave Leslie absolute confidence. Surround the manor and fully arm yourselves. If necessary, directly start a war. Leslie fiercely ordered, double the allowance and pay the salary. This is not a child's play. Yes. Chapter 256. According to Roddy's memory, the kingdom would experience an extremely long winter in 2 years' time. Many people died that year, and some roads were completely closed until 2 years later. Some mountains were so heavily covered in snow that the terrain changed completely. To the players, it was just a new dungeon or a patch, but to the natives, it was a cruel test of nature. The first signs of the winter in 589 were already there in 588. After a long time of preparation, the second snow of the year finally fell from the gloomy sky, and it seemed to be getting heavier. When evening came, the scenery outside the window was still clear because of the snow. Looking at the white snow, Serene felt that everything in front of him was a little unreal. From the moment he decided to look for Roddy to the moment he sat in his room facing the stove, everything had changed in just a few hours. The scene of the shop being smashed by the Wolverine mercenary group was still vivid in his mind, and then a series of dreamlike twists and turns. But the thing that shocked him the most was the conversation between Roddy and the servant. Serene could not figure out what kind of relationship he had with Duke. The Dukes of Angmar were the most powerful nobles in the whole of Ifta. To an unknown mercenary or cobbler, they were unreachable figures. But Roddy, who had no noble status at all, could actually get Duke to send his butler to fetch him. Obviously, Roddy was not bragging when he said that he saved Duke's life. But why did he not want to be promoted? Why did he have to fight with those nobles in this broken town? There were many questions. Serene thought for a long time, but he was too lazy to think about it. The only thing he could think about was the strange method Roddy used to make leather good. Before, he thought that Roddy was completely wasting materials, but now that he thought about it, the unfinished wrist guard seemed to have some details that were as precise as his. It was just that he had never used that method before, so he thought that Roddy was messing around. Could he really make an excellent product? But messing up the magic nodes was equivalent to destroying the leather. Serene shook his head and denied this possibility. He had never told anyone about his fortuitous encounter. The glowing stone tablet gave him a special ability. But from another perspective, Serene did not realize how great his ability was. He only knew that the leather he had tanned was far more effective than ordinary leather tools when it came to making things. But no matter how good it was still far from being a magic equipment. He had not seen real magic equipment for many years. Roddy looked like he was only in his 20s. Even if he started practicing at the age of 10, it would be difficult for him to make something new. Suluan shook his head. In the end, he felt that it was necessary to tell Roddy what he thought about the equipment. Otherwise, it would be a waste of so many good pelts. He was an honest man, so he immediately went out of his room to look for Roddy. He found that the door to Roddy's study was locked. After asking the maid, he turned around and walked downstairs. As he walked across the slightly cold marble floor, Suluan looked out of the window and saw a large group of black shadows approaching on the snow-covered ground. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Here's the letter from the Duke of Angmar. There are also some letters to prove the ownership of the territory. I've also brought this codex with me to prove it. The Duke has even arranged for a special escort team to escort the letter. However, since I've been ordered to hurry here, they'll probably arrive a little later. John, the butler, stated the purpose of his trip. It was almost evening, and the room was dimly lit with candles. Roddy nodded in the flickering candlelight and replied, I'll pack up and set off with the team tomorrow morning. We need to postpone the matter in Urza village for a while. Gig Town does not have enough soldiers at the moment. If possible, ask for more people. Sodaloy picked up his teacup and took a few sips. This winter is going to be very cold. We won't be able to recruit a standing army until next spring, so we can't be careless in this regard. A standing army? Baron Sodaloy, there's no sign of a war in the Ivorta territory, right? John wasn't as smart as the original Alpha. He could only be described as an honest man with limited knowledge. He had no problem with serving people, but he knew nothing about analysis and strategy. Actually, this is an agreement between me and the Duke. Back then, when young Mistress Sally asked for reinforcements from the fortress, there was no response from the soldiers at all. This proves that the entire territory is lacking in emergency forces. Now, we're establishing a standing army to prevent a similar situation from happening again. Roddy came up with a bunch of extravagant excuses. Although part of it was true, the army that he was going to build was not for an emergency, but for the real purpose of war. Lord Baron, dinner is ready. The maid came over to remind them, and the three of them were about to continue their discussion at the dining table. But when they walked to the front hall, the scout on duty came with a piece of surprising news. There are 70 people encircling the manor. Their intentions are unclear. Although their intentions were unclear, everyone knew what it meant to besiege the manor in the middle of the night. Baron Sodaloy, the Wolverine mercenary group needs an explanation from you. The shouts from outside the manor quickly reached here. Through the gate, one could vaguely see a few dark figures under the torches still surrounding the entrance. John's face instantly turned ugly. What are they trying to do? Are they the remnants of the undead? Maybe. Roddy grinned, but his smile was a little cold. He knew what he needed to do when facing these idiots again and again. He waved his hand and said, "Open the gate." The scout immediately executed his order mechanically. Although it was just a simple sentence, the scout who came to open the gate did not show any fear in the face of the heavily armed mercenaries. It was as if he did not see them at all. This kind of obedience did not bring much deterrence to the mercenaries, but it made Leslie, who was standing in the middle of the team, feel a chill in his heart. Chapter 257. In the era of the Kingdom of Cairn, although there was a clear hierarchy between the various classes, it did not mean that a new noble would immediately be respected after obtaining an identity. The fear of the nobles did not come from the word itself. To put it bluntly, the most fundamental fear came from violence. The soldiers and power in the hands of the lords were the things that people feared. For example, the deceased Earl Owen's identity was hereditary, and his family had lasted for more than 230 years. And with 230 years of accumulation, the connections, power, and resources behind him, when these things were like mountains in front of ordinary people, who would have the courage to treat it indifferently? In contrast, Owen's title of Earl was just a symbol. Leslie dared to provoke Sodeler, but it did not mean that he was not afraid of the nobles. He was just not afraid of Sodeler's power. The Wolverine mercenary group had been established for 27 years, and its industries were all over the territory of Ifta. Its foundation was no less than that of some nobles, and even more than that of Baron Sodeler. Although the mercenary group did not have enough interest chains to make profits like the large trading companies, Leslie knew that these industries under his hands were in a critical period of transformation. This time, the accidental death of Viscount Tranca gave Leslie the opportunity to transform the mercenary group into a trading company. He wanted to develop more interest chains and gradually cultivate the mercenary group into his own private army to maintain the interest pyramid that was about to be established, and at the same time build his forces into a huge group comparable to the nobles. For Leslie, who had a low level of education, he naturally couldn't come up with such a development strategy. If it was inspiration, the pharmacist who cooperated with them in the Pharmacist Guild was the one who really made his ambition inflated. Before this, his concept of making money was nothing more than a local gangster sucking the marrow out of the bones. But now that he had a goal, Leslie felt full of energy, and even had a sense of superiority to surpass the nobles. "Continue to shout, ask that Sodeler to come out and negotiate with me." Leslie confidently assigned tasks to his deputy, and he stood leisurely at the back of the team, looking at the ruined manor in front of him with a mocking smile on his face. "Leader, I just heard that they seemed to be very brave in the battle a few days ago and killed a lot of people." "Oh, so what?" In the face of the kind reminder of his subordinate, Leslie still had the same expression. She turned her head and said indifferently, "Does killing a lot of people mean I don't dare to touch him? Do you see this manor? Why did I come here personally to force him to negotiate with me? That's because I've sent people to investigate this place in advance. He doesn't have many subordinates." The regiment commander's tone was filled with confidence. "You want to control the town with just a few dozen soldiers? You want to annex everything with just a few patrol teams? This Baron is too inexperienced. Look, he can only send 6 people to block the door. So what if they are strong? Can he stop me from threatening him?" The guild leader is indeed wise. All the mercenaries who thought that Leslie was a rash person were convinced. They couldn't help but admire Leslie. If only they were as smart as their leader. The sun had set and the heavy snow had stopped. The gloomy sky gradually cleared up. The cold air had brought a gust of wind with the bleakness and coldness of winter. The moonlight reflected off the ground, giving the surrounding a good view. At this time, Leslie could even see the silhouettes in front of the window on the second floor of the manor. Soon, the sound of the manor's gate opening made him raise his head. 2 scouts raised their torches to illuminate the place. With the light from the torches, Leslie saw several figures walking out one after another. An old man, a young man dressed in noble clothes, a man in a cloak with his face hidden under the hood walking in front, and behind them Leslie's eyes instantly lit up with greed. Of the 2 people walking in the back, one was the priest, Kesha, whom he had thoughts about before. The other person carrying a short bow also had a graceful figure, which made Leslie's belly burn with desire. "Tsk, seems like I'm in luck today," he muttered to himself and then waved his hand, ordering the mercenaries to spread out in formation. He took a step forward and said in a loud voice, "Baron Sodeler, my deputy leader was beaten up by your patrol team. Aren't you going to give me an explanation for this? If you don't give me an explanation and want to negotiate with me, then I can only wait to be slaughtered." Leslie thought proudly in his heart. Unexpectedly, before Sodeler said anything, the old man suddenly said, "What right do you have to speak here? Yo, where did this old man come from? Don't you want to live enough and come to show off in front of our leader?" The surrounding mercenaries laughed. Leslie was displeased and couldn't be bothered with Steward John. He looked at Sodeler and said, "As a dignified baron, you let this old man take the lead? I admire you." The few people standing in front of the manor didn't have any extra expressions. Roddy wasn't interested in dealing with this matter at this time. He took the short bow and quiver and walked out. One reason was to prevent accidents, and the other was to see how Steward John would deal with this, because this old man's attitude directly showed how important he was to Angmar. Natha followed behind Roddy as a student, while Akasha was called by Roddy to be insurance. In a situation where conflict might break out, a powerful priest standing behind them would definitely give the team a different level of confidence. At this time, the main character, Sodeler, wasn't a puppet placed in front of the stage by Roddy. He was very clear about his responsibilities, and he was quick-witted and had absolutely enough methods to deal with it. Although he didn't care about this mercenary group in front of him, from a practical point of view, their actions actually represented the views of some other forces in the territory. He had no qualifications, no money, and no power. In Hollier City, he might be able to bully others, but in other places, he would definitely be bound. What he needed to do was to fiercely fight back and make an example out of them. Admire me? Actually, I admire you more. Sodeler shrugged. I guess you're the first person who dares to speak to Steward John like this. The mercenaries didn't have any knowledge of the common name, John, and as for the word steward, they automatically ignored it. There were as many stewards in the territory of nobles as there were hairs on a cow, and using it to scare people was an old trick. So Leslie wasn't afraid at all, and even felt that it was necessary to use some means. He raised his hand and pointed forward. Just as he was about to order the mercenaries to move forward, he found that the hooded young man in front of him suddenly raised his head and reached for his short bow. This action instantly made the atmosphere tense. Even Sodeler didn't understand what Roddy was going to do. He thought that this guy was going to directly solve the problem with force, but then he found that Roddy didn't even look at the mercenaries. Instead, he took off his hood and looked up at the sky with a serious face. Something's wrong. Roddy's words and actions made Leslie immediately think that he was deliberately mystifying and stalling for time. He opened his mouth to mock a few words, but the next moment, he instantly stopped because of Roddy's action, because in front of him, the young man in front of him had knocked an arrow and pulled the bowstring, ready to shoot in half a second. But his target wasn't Leslie or any of the mercenaries. Everyone could see that at this moment, Roddy actually pointed the short bow to the sky. When they looked up, they found that there were actually 3 large black birds hovering in the sky above their heads. They didn't fly mindlessly like ordinary birds, but at the same speed, at the same altitude, and in a circular arc. Because it was a full moon night, the moonlight illuminated the snow and made it extremely high visibility. So even the mercenaries with poor eyesight could clearly see the three strange black birds in the sky. It wasn't strange to see birds flying in the winter, but to fly in this form in the night was really abnormal. Even the dullest mercenary could detect their abnormality. And the mercenaries with better eyesight could even see the flickering red light in the birds' eyes. At this moment, whether it was Leslie who had a card up his sleeve, Steward John who was unusually angry, or Sodeler who was ready to take advantage of the situation to trample on others, they all raised their heads to look at the three strange birds hovering above their heads. Their original thoughts were completely disrupted. But the fastest to react, Roddy didn't give them time to think. Almost at the next moment, he raised the short bow and aimed at the birds. He shouted to Akasha beside him, "Holy light spell!" twice in a row. "Natha, help me deal with the one in front on the left." A second later, Roddy's arrow was the first to fly out, and Akasha's golden light followed closely behind. The dark night was the best background to set off the holy light spell, and the snow-white ground made the sudden flickering light incomparably bright. Akasha actually didn't know why Roddy wanted to cast this holy light spell, because its function was to illuminate. In the past, it was most often used in certain religious ceremonies. In terms of killing power, it could only cause burns to specific races like the undead. But Roddy's words were in order, and as a follower, Akasha could only choose to obey. When the dazzling light lit up, the bodies of the three large birds, which were about 40 meters above the ground, suddenly swayed. Immediately after, the long arrow pierced through the body of one of the birds, causing it to fall to the ground without any suspense. The speed of Roddy's arrow was too fast, and he almost didn't stop to aim at the next target. He didn't care about the mercenaries in front of him who couldn't open their eyes because of the holy light spell. He narrowed his eyes and shot again the moment Akasha's holy light spell lit up for the second time. The remaining two blackbirds had already begun to dodge, and the sudden dive allowed them to luckily avoid Roddy's arrow. But just as they determined their flight path, Natha's arrow followed, successfully stabbing them and successfully killing them. From start to finish, in a short 4 seconds, only one of the three blackbirds above them was left, and the remaining one had already flapped its wings with all its might and almost immediately left Roddy and Natha's attack range. Natha raised her bow and was about to shoot again, but Roddy raised his hand to stop her. "Enough, I deliberately let it go." This sentence made Natha confused. The wood elves had extremely strong night vision, so she could clearly recognize that the black bird was the blood crow that had attacked her people previously. Since it was a unit of the undead, why didn't he shoot them all down? But such a question didn't have the time to think about it. Screams and exclamations sounded among the mercenaries, causing the original group of people to instantly shift their attention from the sky to the ground. After adapting to the dim light, everyone realized that a mercenary behind Leslie was already lying on the ground, his face and fingers charred black as if they had been burnt by fire. Chapter 258. Screams reverberated in their ears. The mercenaries tried their best to open their eyes, but when they saw their comrades' charred skin, they couldn't react to what had just happened. To be honest, everything that happened in that instant made the two parties who were about to clash freeze on the spot in astonishment. For a full minute, they stared at each other as they pondered the meaning of everything that happened before their eyes. Some were confused, but Leslie could clearly feel that his heart was being devoured by a gradually spreading fear. As a mercenary group leader, Leslie could be considered as experienced and knowledgeable. He didn't know what the three birds that suddenly appeared above his head were, but he was very clear on what it meant to be able to shoot down these birds. Archery was just a general term. To laymen, the most direct reflection of good archery was accurate shooting. As long as it was accurate, it didn't matter. After all, the purpose of shooting an arrow was to hit the target. No one could deny this point. But to be able to shoot down a high-speed moving target in the sky, this kind of archery could definitely be considered as proficient. Modern people always heard idioms such as bending the bow to shoot the eagle, or killing 2 eagles with 1 arrow. They always felt that shooting down the eagle in the sky wasn't difficult at all, and it was something that could be done by just raising one's hand. In fact, even a skilled archer who had trained for more than 5 years would find it hard to have much confidence in shooting down a target in the sky. Estimating the distance, calculating the parabola of the arrow, the small size of the target, the movement speed, the speed of the arrow, the wind speed, and even the direction of the arrow's rotation all required extraordinary precision in shooting down a target in the sky. Moreover, the further the target was, the more these effects would increase. Even an experienced hunter wouldn't dare to say that he had a 30% accuracy in shooting a flying goose from 30 meters away. In this kind of night with extremely low visibility, with the wind blowing and the target being more than 40 meters away, Leslie didn't believe that anyone could hit such a target. But the reality before him made him realize a problem. The sharpshooter that others claimed to be able to shoot down hundreds of people by himself might really exist. And looking at the 2 figures holding short bows, Leslie's back was almost immediately soaked in cold sweat. But what made him even more flustered was the symptoms of the fallen mercenary behind him. Under the holy light spell, there were burn marks on someone's body. What this meant, everyone was very clear in their hearts: undead. Undead. Someone finally recovered from the series of unforeseen events and backed away from the wailing mercenary with a strange cry. His movement caused everyone to panic, and the crowd instantly dispersed, leaving only Leslie standing there with an ashen face and the smoking mercenary. Butler John of the Lucifron family was extremely sensitive to the word undead. His gaze focused on that figure, and he turned to Sodeler and said, "Lord Duke has ordered that all undead in his territory be killed without mercy." This wasn't a negotiating tone. It was a reminder to Sodeler, "If you don't act immediately, I'll do it for you." His words were far more inconceivable than Roddy's arrows and the undead on the ground. Duke's order? Who would mention Duke's order here? At this moment, Leslie had completely lost the intention to come here. He took a step back and thought about the identity of this undead subordinate. The undead was one of his most capable assistants. Under Vice Leader Davy, this undead had the most authority. Leslie couldn't help but shiver when he thought about the undead's background. This subordinate who was screaming miserably was the pharmacist who gave him the strategic plan and recommended him to join the team 2 years ago. Could it be that the pharmacist was also an undead? Leslie's mind was a mess, and he carefully recalled the few major events that he had cooperated with that pharmacist. He suddenly realized that his smooth sailing all these years wasn't because of good luck, but because he had the pharmacist's great help in a few key events that allowed him to have today's achievements. What did successful people fear the most? It wasn't the strength of the enemy, nor was it his own helplessness in the face of difficulties. It was a fact that he suddenly realized at a certain moment. His so-called strength was just an illusion carefully arranged by others. Leslie's lips trembled, and he looked blankly at Sodeler and the others. He stammered, trying to explain, This guy has been lurking in my mercenary group for so long, and today he finally, enough. Sodeler originally had all kinds of backup plans to deal with these guys, but everything that had happened just now made him realize that there was a more urgent problem to solve. So he immediately drew his sword and slashed at Leslie. Colluding with the undead and attempting to attack the nobles, traitors must die. Sodeler was already exchanging blows with Leslie as he shouted angrily. On one side, there was the amazingly talented descendant of the Spectre Knight, and on the other side, There was a panicked mercenary with no fighting spirit. There was no suspense at all in the outcome of such a fight. Leslie raised his sword to block, and then with a bang, he was kicked away by Sodeler. The mercenaries were in an uproar, and the scene instantly fell into chaos. They rushed up to help, but they didn't dare to do anything because the word traitor and the still struggling undead brought too much shock to them. For a moment, they couldn't fight together like before. In the noisy and dark battlefield, Rhodey held the short bow in his hand. He faced the group of restless mercenaries but did not have the intention to shoot. He just sighed and looked into the distance. He then whispered something to Butler John. After that, he turned around and gestured to Nada and Akasha in another direction. The flash of brilliance just now was now like a dagger in the hands of an assassin, once again hidden in the darkness. The next moment after he disappeared, the illumination of torches appeared one after another in the distance, followed by the sound of footsteps and horses' hooves. Steward John took a deep breath, and then shouted to the approaching team in the darkness, "Lucifron guards, arrest this group of traitors." Leslie, who was kicked away by Sodeler, was gritting his teeth at this moment. But after hearing Steward John's words, his eyes widened, and he directly sat back down. Lucifron guards was a name that no one would confuse. In the entire Iferta territory, there was only one family that could be called Lucifron, so there could only be one person in power behind the guards, Angmar Lucifron. Leslie's heart instantly turned to ashes. The successive blows made him completely lose the desire to fight. The fate of the Wolverine mercenary group, at this time, was completely like that of an ant crushed by the wheel of history, with no room for resistance. At the same time, Roddy did not have much of the pleasure of revenge, but instead felt extremely terrible. The snow under his feet crunched, and the cold air swept past his cheeks, gradually cooling his chaotic thoughts, slowly sorting them into useful information. Roddy, what was that just now? Akasha followed closely behind Roddy, but her physical strength was not as good as the other two, and she was slightly out of breath when she spoke. Blood crows, a trick of the necromancers. Roddy's eyes involuntarily looked in the direction of the silent forest, and then immediately said to Natha in the wood elf language, "It's the kind you saw in the Wagra ruins." Natha was silent, but her expression clearly became more serious. "How did you discover them?" Akasha was obviously curious about this question. Although the night vision was good, who would notice those 3 inconspicuous black spots in the vast sky? "They're not just flying, they're casting a spell, so I can detect them." Roddy did not intend to explain the meaning of the combat stance of environmental sensitivity, nor would he say that he had encountered similar situations countless times before. He just made a gesture and continued, 3 blood crows hovering at a low altitude, which means that the necromancers are focusing on investigating this area, and usually it means that they are coveting this place. There was more that Roddy did not say. In the game, the strength of the summoning necromancers in investigation was the signature skill of the blood crows, all-seeing eye. 3 blood crows hovering for 3 hours could remember all the details of the buildings in Gigtown, and even the position of each brick could be confirmed. This was essentially different from a simple bird's-eye view, which often meant that this would be the place where the undead would move next. It was precisely because he knew this that Roddy was in a bad mood. He had finally gotten rid of all kinds of dangers and had a break for a while. Who would have thought that the town that he had just conquered would be targeted by the undead before he could even warm it up? Akasha naturally did not know of his depression. This little priest had been completely subdued by Roddy's erudition. Since she knew Roddy until now, Akasha felt that she could get the answer to any question from him. And thinking of the way she dealt with it just now, she looked at Roddy with some hesitation, wanting to say something but hesitating. "Ask what you want to ask, I don't treat you as outsiders." Roddy continued to walk forward, comparing the surrounding buildings, and then led them to a small path. "That I'm not sure why you wanted me to cast the Holy Light spell twice. Akasha asked in a low voice. Although the Holy Light spell has the effect of burning the undead, it's completely useless when the distance is too far. Why do you think I did that? Roddy's rhetorical question was not directed at Akasha, but he repeated Akasha's question to Natha in the wood elf language. I don't know. Natha answered truthfully. In fact, what she did not understand was that with Roddy's archery skills, he had a high chance of killing the last blood crow, so why did he let it run away? The Holy Light spell is just a ray of light, but many of the divine spells will be accompanied by light when released, such as Retribution spell, Divine Punishment spell, or Light Catastrophe. After the light passes, the blood crows will be killed, and when the last blood crow reports these effects to the necromancer, the other party will only think that there is a powerful priest in Gig Town. Do you understand? Akasha's mouth was wide open. Akasha's mouth was agape, and it took almost 3 seconds for her to recover. She then nodded with a face full of admiration. The lethality of the divine arts was limited. The punishment spell was the lowest level. It had poor accuracy, low attack power, and could even be said to have no power. However, the divine punishment spell was enough to achieve the effect that Rhodey had described. However, to be able to cast the divine punishment spell basically meant that the caster was at least stronger than Bishop Benjamin. In the player's concept, it meant that the caster was above level 30. Chapter 259. Roddy repeated his answer in the wood elf language. For Natha, this kind of battle thinking was what she really lacked at the moment. How to achieve the strongest effect with the least amount of power was always the most important knowledge for a warrior. Although Natha's strength and talent were not bad, a truly strong person would always use their brains the most. There was often such a situation in the game. Two people with the same equipment, the same talent, the same level, and the same damage output standing behind the boss, but after a battle there would always be a big difference in the damage output. This was because players with good skills could often plan their skills more scientifically, instead of rolling around the keyboard with their eyes closed. Natha, you made a mistake from the moment you pulled out the arrow. Just now, Roddy continued to analyze the battle just now. He was as rigorous as a professional professor commenting on a student's thesis. Of course, the so-called comment was basically one word: scolding. His words made Natha purse her lips slightly, and her originally expressionless face faintly blushed. After all, Natha was not a robot. In the past, no one in Aisha village would criticize her for this or that. But when it came to Roddy, she was really scolded mercilessly. It sounded as if Natha did not know how to shoot an arrow at all. I know. She finally could not help but reply aloud. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and she could not even lift her head up. Roddy did not realize this at all. After hearing her reply, he was too lazy to continue. He just said, "Your shooting habits are too bad. There are too many things that need to be changed. It seems that the previous practice is simply not worth the effort. I really don't know how you did it to this point." Akasha did not understand the Elven language. After listening to Roddy's long speech, Natha actually showed an expression of shame. An inexplicable feeling arose in her heart. Is Roddy scolding me? It seemed like this wood elf wasn't that charming after all. This thought made the corners of her mouth rise a little, but Akasha did not expect Roddy to turn his head and say, "Akasha, there is still a lot of room for improvement in the speed of your magic release." Just now, Roddy had always been a lone ranger. Every time after a battle, he would be straightforward and merciless. So, Natha and Akasha were not spared. After he finished talking about the wood elves, the beautiful priestess was also criticized. 2 minutes later, the two men behind Roddy lowered their heads and remained silent. They had the same thought about Roddy. "Can't you save us some face? We are women after all." Roddy, who was walking in front, didn't take this into consideration. As an otaku with a low EQ, it was difficult for him to treat women differently, especially when it came to taking care of their emotions. His attitude toward Akasha and Natha was the same as his attitude toward Sodalar. Think about it. Could it be the same? Rhodey, who did not notice the dissatisfaction of the two beauties, was busy looking for the blood crows that had fallen to the ground. After walking for more than 200 meters, he finally stopped at a fork in the street. He sniffed and walked into a dark alley. He then crouched down. The blood crow's corpse was pierced by an arrow and lay motionless on the ground. A strong rancid smell wafted out, but Roddy raised his hand and chopped off the blood crow's head with his sword. Then he turned to Akasha and said, "Light the ring." Although Akasha obeyed the order, her pouting expression showed that she was not in a good mood. The gentle holy light dispelled the darkness, but at the same time, it also brought about bursts of black smoke. The corpses of the blood crows quickly disintegrated into ashes after being illuminated by the light. As for the crow's head that Rhodey had just beheaded, he used his sword to pry it open and found a crystal object inside. Divi crystal. Excellent magic tool material. After being illuminated by the holy light, it is crystal clear, without any impurities. Good luck. Roddy's eyes moved, and he immediately held it in his hand. Although the words "excellent" were written in blue, Roddy knew that this crystal was extremely rare. In his memory, it was very popular in the auction house all year round. To put it bluntly, its function was to record images. The reason why blood crows could become the necromancer's most powerful investigative method was that they could use the Divi crystal to record what they saw, and the necromancer could retrieve and read it. However, when this crystal fell into the hands of a human, its function was no longer to investigate, but to copy. Most of the advanced skills of each profession were learned from the teacher, but the powerful skills were basically found in the collection of the boss. The greatest use of the Divi crystal was to copy these precious skill scrolls through the use of a magic circle. Rare scrolls that could originally only be used by one person, after being copied, could have one or more learning opportunities. One had to know that the truly powerful skills in Earth Splitter would only appear in the middle and later stages, which was after the player reached level 25. Moreover, exquisite skill scrolls were priceless in the market, and those who possessed them were all elites or pillars of the guild. Therefore, if one of these scrolls could be copied, it would definitely have an unimaginable impact on the development of the guild. Thinking of this, Roddy couldn't help but fantasize the scene of a group of exquisite knights using powerful skills to crush their enemies. He immediately held the crystal and laughed foolishly. Akasha and Natha, who were behind him, couldn't understand why this guy suddenly went crazy. They looked at each other, a little dumbfounded. Roddy didn't explain and only laughed foolishly as he ran to the other side of the town to look for the crystal on the body of the blood crows. But this time, he only found a Divi crystal fragment. It no longer had the qualifications to be used as a raw material, and the words "normal" were written in white. Roddy wasn't greedy. After all, the drop rate of the Divi crystal was extremely low. At this stage, having a piece was already a big profit. He carefully looked at the treasure in his hand and carefully stuffed it into his pocket. When he turned around, he saw Natha and Akasha's strange expressions. He hurriedly explained, "When I see something good, I can't help it. I can't help it, as if I believe you." Akasha and Natha thought at the same time. The battle could be considered to be coming to an end now. Roddy confirmed that there was no danger on the street, and then returned to the manor with Natha and Akasha. They stepped through the snow and smoothly arrived at the collapsed gate of the manor. The figures of the mercenaries had basically disappeared. They must have been captured and taken to another place. There were some bloodstains on the ground, and the charred undead also disappeared without a trace. Roddy sniffed and smelled the smell of blood in the air. He asked, "How are the casualties?" a group of scattered soldiers. They're not a threat. Sodeler had been waiting for him for a long time. At this time, he looked at Butler John, who was in the distance talking to his subordinate. The Duke guards left some face and didn't directly execute them on the spot. So, I asked the mercenary leader a few simple words just now. The general situation is that the pharmacist we just found was Ansiden's man. He had planted a spy in this mercenary group a long time ago and secretly supported his forces. Now, he is preparing to use their power to take revenge. This group of old bones refuses to give up their desire to kill me. Roddy's sentence pattern was very strange, and Sodeler didn't quite understand. He asked, "What?" "It's okay. Be careful from now on. I'll leave tomorrow." "Oh right, Akasha, stay here. You must take care of her." I'm not going with you?" Akasha asked in disbelief. Her tone immediately became a bit anxious. Just now, she was thinking about how to ask Roddy for advice on the way. In the end, she suddenly found out that she was going to be abandoned here. This kind of news immediately made her panic. "It will be very awkward to meet you in Rose Cross, so I can't bring you there." Roddy didn't know how to comfort people at all. He just laid out the reason and did not explain further. Instead, he turned to Natha and said, "You will leave with me tomorrow. Go back and pack your things now." Natha nodded and left. Akasha looked at her back and silently drew circles in the air. She left with a look of grievance. She thought to herself that Roddy really wanted to be alone with this wood elf, but she could only hug the essence of energy and gnaw on it in the cold room. How sad. Roddy didn't notice her pitiful eyes at all because this otaku was frowning at the status bar in front of him. He opened the battle log and was surprised to find a few lines of words. "You have prevented Ansiden's men from taking revenge. Your reputation with Tasman Kingdom has dropped to extreme hatred." Reputation went up and down. Hollier City and Rose Cross were all above respected, while Viper Cross was hostile, which was considered normal. But above hostile was indifferent, and below it was hatred and extreme hatred. Extreme hatred was the lowest level and could not drop any further. When the reputation was hostile, both parties could start a war the moment they met. But when it reached the extreme hatred level, Roddy knew very well that the other party would probably specifically target him. Before transmigrating here, Roddy had never reached this level of reputation with any faction. Now that his reputation had dropped so quickly, there could only be one reason. He had greatly affected Tasman's deployment and national strategy. Thinking of this, Roddy suddenly recalled a rumor he had heard in the past. He immediately opened the mission bar and held his breath as he scrolled down. Epic mission. Damn it. How can it be triggered so easily? Looking at the row of red words that suddenly appeared, Roddy swallowed hard. Judgment of the Bone Throne. Unlike the handwriting displayed on the other missions, this one was bright red with a layer of dark golden patterns on the outside. The Emperor of the Dead Augustine has sensed your threat to the Tasman Kingdom. You are in a dangerous situation. Of course I know I'm in a dangerous situation. How could anyone not be in danger when being targeted by an old monster above level 60? Chapter 260. In Roddy's memory, epic quests were one of the things that PvE players loved to talk about the most. Although Roddy was a pure PvP player, it was unavoidable for him to encounter NPC's quests most of the time. This was because these daily quests, which could be easily completed, could provide him with a lot of EXP. As for daily quests, stage quests, dungeon quests, and wanted quests, he had seen many of them. Therefore, when it came to these epic quests with dark gold patterns, Roddy understood what they meant. Danger. Difficulty. Players' understanding of the game and overall strength had to be strong to be able to complete such difficult quests. Most importantly, these quests had many steps and were full of variables. Moreover, they were unique. Every epic quest only had one chance to be completed. Once it was judged as a failure, it could not be accepted again and would disappear forever. There would not be a second person who received the same quest. In other words, this epic quest named Judgment of the White Bone Throne didn't have any strategy to speak of at all. It was created by the game system based on the time, reputation, and strength gap. Roddy could not find any similar quest samples to use as a comparison. His advantage as a reincarnator was greatly reduced, and this made Roddy lose much confidence. However, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. The reason why epic quests were sought after and researched wasn't because of their insane difficulty, but because of the rewards that countless players coveted. EXP and gold coins were no longer important. What was truly priceless were the powerful titles, skills, and rune embedding. The rewards obtained after completing the stage quests could completely make a mediocre player stand out and become a powerful character that could change the direction of the game's history. This was definitely an opportunity. Although this quest gave Roddy a lot of pressure, it also meant that he had a real chance to rise from mediocrity. Roddy first glanced around to make sure that Sodeler had gone to talk to Steward John. Then, he walked to the fireplace in the conference hall and carefully studied the quest panel. Under the simple quest description, this epic quest was very different from ordinary quests. Apart from the dark gold font, there was nothing in the quest clues section. There was no hint at all, but there was an extra line below. Duration of this stage, 150 days. This gave Roddy a fright, but he immediately felt relieved. Epic quests were supposed to be difficult. 150 days was the requirement for this first step, not the requirement for the entire quest chain. Otherwise, Roddy would not have the ability to rush to Tasman and kill Augustine in 5 months. This was illogical. Looking at the color of the words, dark red meant that this quest was extremely difficult for his current level. If he insisted on doing it, the difficulty would probably be several times higher than the basic difficulty, so he couldn't rush it. So, the most important thing now was to quickly raise his level. Augustine. Roddy frowned as he thought about the big boss that he would have to deal with sooner or later. He carefully recalled his previous understanding of him, but before he could sort out his thoughts, Zodeler's footsteps rang out in the corridor. Raising his head, the young baron walked in with a serious face. He looked around, and after confirming that there was no one on either side, he raised his hand and handed a letter to Roddy. This is... Under the candlelight, Roddy's frown deepened. An emergency military situation at the border? How did it get here? The Dukes of Angmar just sent it over. Sitting on the armchair opposite Roddy, Sodeler stretched out his hand to loosen the leather belt that was tightened because of the battle. He exhaled and said, "It's a sighting report from the western border a week ago." The West. Roddy reached out and opened the red envelope in his hand. This color represented military emergency. It was the kind of urgent information that needed to be personally delivered to Duke. His eyes quickly swept over the handwriting, and Roddy's eyes suddenly narrowed. There are traces of the Orc Wolf Riders? That place seems to be the closest to the territory of Rohar's hammer. How long has it been? Isn't the speed of their recovery a little too fast? Roddy immediately summoned the map. His system's map column was originally useless because unexplored areas were not shown on the map. In the past, the EFTA territory on it was basically a vast expanse of white and had no reference value at all. But after seeing the detailed map contributed by Ansadin, Roddy's map column automatically updated the contents on it, so he could now directly look at it in front of his eyes. On the densely marked map, Roddy's gaze fell on the western part of EFTA. This slightly barren area was sparsely populated, and unlike Norland Village in the northwest, It was bordered by the Nehemiah grassland. Its location was very special. On one side was the Black Mountain range of the Tasman Kingdom, and on the other side was a forest that extended from the edge of the Nehemiah grassland. Behind it were a few villages in EFTA territory. It was in a very awkward, surrounded on three sides zone. Roddy raised his eyebrows because he saw a familiar word in this area: Elson. This was one of the main points that Ansadin had marked. Why did the orcs appear here too? The letter was delivered from a sentry post called Sola, located about 70 to 80 kilometers away from Elson, isolated by the vast expanse of wilderness and forest. It must be a sentry post specially set up by the Dukes of Angmar after he heard about the orc crisis. According to history, the Sola sentry post would never appear, and orcs had never appeared in the western part of the kingdom in known history. What was going on? Could it all be attributed to the butterfly effect that he had caused? The location of the Sola sentry post is too remote, so it took 6 days for the message to reach Hollier City, and Lord Duke immediately sent the original copy to us. This means, Sodeler analyzed the hidden meaning of all this in a low voice, his fingers rhythmically tapping on the solid wood armrest. He wants us to take responsibility? We were the ones who killed the orcs, so we must know the situation of the orcs the best. Angmar probably threw it here to wait for us to analyze it. Roddy put the fiery red letter away. It's impossible for us to take responsibility for this matter. How many people do we have in total? He should be the one to worry about the real defense of the territory. We've already fulfilled our obligation by providing a plan, any more would just be forcing him against his will. But I think Steward John's intention seems to be more urgent. He's just a steward, and stewards will only be eager to help their master. Even if he worries about the territory, he won't be able to get to the point. Roddy opened his eyes and looked at Sodeler. There's no need to consider everyone's feelings. Just because someone has expectations of us doesn't mean that we have to work hard according to their wishes. Sodeler pondered for a few seconds, nodded, and did not speak again. There's no meaning in living under other people's expectations. I know what I'm doing. Roddy did not say too much. Sodeler was still growing up. Although good guy sounded good, he could never be independent. If Sodeler wanted to become the strongest sword, the first thing he had to learn was to reject those seemingly reasonable but actually meaningless requests. To be honest, I didn't think I would reach this step in just half a year, so sometimes I don't think things through. Sodeler quickly understood Roddy's meaning, and his words sounded a little ashamed. I don't mean to criticize you. Roddy did not expect this guy to be so thin-skinned. He smiled and said, everyone has limited energy, and no one can take care of everything. No matter what kind of nobleman you become in the future, you should know what you want to do. Of course, you also have to remember you're not living under my expectations. I'm helping you because I hope that you and I have a common goal and work hard together, not treating you as a tool that can be used. These words seemed to untie some knot in Sodeler's heart. His tense expression relaxed a lot, and he slowly exhaled and said with some fatigue, I suddenly have too much power, and I'm always afraid that I'll do something wrong. I'm being cautious, but I find that I'm overthinking many things. It's only right to have this kind of process. This was the first time in a long time that Roddy had such an in-depth conversation with Sodeler. He could feel Sodeler's cautiousness and the things he upheld in his heart. Strong self-control, a sense of fairness, and a sense of justice. It was no accident that he could break through the barrier of level 60 in history. After the short conversation, Roddy did not plan to say too much. He got up and returned to the house, leaving Sodeler in a daze in the living room. When he walked up to the second floor, Roddy found Serene pacing back and forth. What are you doing? Roddy's words startled Serene. The latter stood rooted to the ground, wanting to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, he could not form them. He had just witnessed the scene of the Wolverine mercenary group being crushed by Duke's guards, so he had a clearer understanding of Roddy's identity. In other words, he suddenly felt that the gap between his status and Roddy's was too big. Status was a formless pressure. Even though Roddy had restrained his aura and was no different from an ordinary passerby, it still made Serene feel nervous and embarrassed. I wanted to talk about the wrist guard. Serene reached out to wipe away the sweat that had appeared due to nervousness. He then stuttered, "I think your crafting method might waste materials." Serene regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth. In his impression, which of the nobles was not temperamental? He had really spoken too quickly and blurted out the truth. Wasn't this just asking for trouble? But he did not expect that Roddy would only be slightly startled before he replied with a smile. "Oh? I happen to be going to Hollier tomorrow. I should be bringing the leather armor there for crafting. I might need your help along the way. If it's possible, come in for a chat?" He pushed the door open and entered the study. Serene heaved a sigh of relief. He could not help but wonder, is Roddy going to let me take over crafting equipment? Chapter 261. In Serene's eyes, the wrist guard that Roddy handed to him was no different from the half-finished product he had seen before. According to his understanding, once the magic nodes in a magical beast's fur were disrupted, no matter how hard he tried, he would not be able to make a top-grade one. But when he thought of the difference in status between him and Roddy, Serene cautiously accepted the wrist guard with both hands. His idea was simple. He would simply praise the wrist guard and then point out the flaws. That way, Roddy would be convinced, right? Looking at Roddy, Serene realized that the latter did not seem to care about what he said. Roddy casually sat in front of the table and began to tidy up the remaining materials. Was this a common problem of leaders? Blind confidence in oneself? Serene shook his head helplessly. He glanced at the wrist guard and was about to speak when his brows suddenly furrowed. What is this? For a moment, many questions popped up in his mind, but he didn't know which one to ask. He had seen this kind of sewing and cutting method before, but after making it, it shouldn't have this kind of effect. As a skilled leathermaker, Serene knew the concept of magic nodes, which proved that he was much stronger than ordinary leathersmith. However, his idea of how to use these magic nodes differed greatly from Roddy. Serene's approach was to let nature take its course, and not disrupt the operation of the nodes. This way, the equipment he made could at least maintain some of the original effects of the magical beast. If he was lucky, it might even have additional protective effects. Roddy's approach was the complete opposite of Serene's. He completely disrupted the operation of the magic nodes and forcibly reorganized them. Serene felt his hands tremble. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Did Roddy deliberately disrupt the magic nodes? Serene's scalp tingled as he carefully observed the stitching patterns. Not to mention the material used, just the fact that there were no mistakes was enough to call it a master's work. The design of the mithril lock was also completely different from previous designs. It was firm and easy to remove. Serene did not think too much about it. He reached out and put the wrist guard on his left arm. Then, he clearly felt a dense wave of magic ripple on his arm and spread throughout his body. How is this possible? Excellent equipment would not have such a strong reaction. Only the legendary, magical equipment could bring about such an effect. Serene had only worn magical equipment once in his life, so he could clearly tell what it meant. Turning the skin of a low-level magical beast into a piece of magical equipment was no less than someone turning rusty copper coins into gold coins in an instant. Why not? Roddy's question seemed to come from far away. Serene shuddered and instantly realized how ridiculous his previous thoughts were. How could he keep thinking of showing off in front of Roddy with his meager abilities? I'm afraid he can't even compare to 1/10 of his abilities, Recalling his previous thoughts, Su Luan could not help but blush. He hurriedly removed the wrist guard and placed it on the table. You're a leather crafting grandmaster? Roddy did not answer the question. Instead, he took out a piece of parchment filled with words and patterns and handed it to Serene. I know what you want to ask. I disrupted the magic nodes to reorganize them. Because I know very well that keeping the magic nodes the same as before was a mistake from the very beginning. What people feared the most was not insufficient effort, but when they thought they were on the path to success for half a lifetime, they suddenly realized that they were heading in the wrong direction. Suren's face paled. For a moment, he could not accept what Roddy had just said. When he looked at the parchment that Roddy handed to him, he froze as if he had been struck by lightning. His chest heaved up and down a few times and he stammered, You're giving this to me? There was nothing else on the parchment except for the rules of reorganizing magic nodes and the secrets of making magical equipment. Serene was shocked because this kind of thing was usually a secret, passed down by a leather crafting family. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a priceless treasure, passed down from generation to generation. But now Roddy gave it to him so casually. What did this mean? Roddy seemed to have guessed what he was thinking. He asked, You want to hear the truth? Serene nodded. I know that you're better at tanning than most people. That's why I came to you. This was the truth, and Roddy had no intention of hiding it. But I think your ability is not limited to tanning. I'll try my best to teach you what I know, and I'll find better materials for you. As long as you're willing, you'll be my personal leather crafting master. You'll become a senior-rank leather crafting master, and then you'll reach Grand Master or even Grand Master. As he spoke, the number of Grand Master leather crafters in the whole kingdom could be counted on two hands, seemed to have become cabbages. But Roddy's indifferent tone made Serene believe that he was not just making empty promises. This did not seem like a negotiation, but the confrontation was completed in silence. Roddy took the initiative and broke down Suren's psychological defense without any bloodshed. He tapped the neatly cut leather armor with his fingers and asked Serene softly, What do you think? The next morning, the undead who was part of the Wolverine mercenary team had his head chopped off, and his head, which was covered in burn marks, was stabbed into a wooden stake. His hideous and painful expression was clearly visible, silently intimidating those who had once looked down on Sodeler, as well as the undead scouts who had been tempted to make a move. The morning wind was cold. Before the sun rose, everything was dark blue. Duke's guards were ready to go after breakfast. More than 40 warhorses stood outside the manor, neighing loudly. When Roddy walked out of the manor, a spacious and comfortable carriage was already parked in front of the door. Butler John personally escorted Roddy away. He stood respectfully beside the carriage and waited. Act according to the situation. I'll leave this place to you. Standing in front of his subordinates, Roddy gave a few simple instructions to Sodeler. His words were full of trust. It's probably not a good choice to keep hiding like this. Don't you want to stand in front of the stage? Sodeler asked in a low voice. He then glanced at Steward John and added, Miss Sally will definitely come back. I think you should seize this opportunity. The Lucifron family is a good choice. You're really... Roddy did not know whether to laugh or cry. Did Sodeler really want him to be a gigolo? But then he thought about it. In the eyes of the nobles of the Kingdom of Karen, marriage was the most common way to get to the top. Sodeler knew Sally's attitude toward him, so it was normal for him to have such an idea. I've never thought about marriage, but I do have plans to become a noble. And it's probably going to be implemented soon. If there's any movement, I'll inform you immediately to prepare. Okay, I'll wait for your orders. Sodeler saluted, followed by a noble salute. This meant that in his heart, obedience to Roddy was always his first priority. Roddy nodded. Without another word, He turned around and got ready to board the carriage. It was now the winter of the year 588. There was not much time left until the year 590. Obtaining the unclaimed territory had become Roddy's next biggest goal. He went to Hollier to receive the reward with the idea of planning to open up the territory. Because there were guards escorting him, Roddy did not intend to bring scouts to protect him. There were only 2 people accompanying him. One was Serene, who was studying the parchment day and night, and the other was Natha, who carried a short bow on her back and pulled up her hood. The priest Akasha was left behind. She stood in the group that had come to see them off. She had a reluctant expression on her face. In the morning, she saw Roddy carrying the semi-finished leather armor. After asking, she found out that one of the armor was made by Roddy for the wood elf. When she thought of this, she felt a little uncomfortable. Why was it only for her? Just because she was a wood elf? Because she was beautiful? Or because she had a good figure? Akasha looked down at her chest. From this angle, she could not even see the tips of her feet. After secretly comparing it with Natha, she could not help but have some absurd thoughts. Could it be that he was more interested in small breasts? Forget it, forget it. What are you thinking about? Akasha, who was always adaptable to circumstances, shook her head and drove these thoughts out of her mind. She touched the ring with her fingertips, and when she looked up, her eyes met with Roddy's. She wanted to say something, but found that Roddy was looking at the top of her head. He suddenly raised his eyebrows and said something strange. Akasha, this can be embedded with runes. What runes? Akasha did not understand. It's okay. I'll tell you when I come back. Practice well and be alert at all times. Roddy was obviously a little distracted. After saying these words absent-mindedly, he looked away. Akasha was a little dumbfounded. This made Akasha a little dumbfounded. Why didn't the master that she followed even say goodbye? Could it be that he was angry with her? The carriage moved quickly. Akasha raised her hand and wanted to wave a few times, but she saw that Roddy had already closed the wooden window of the carriage. She immediately pouted, but then she knew that it was useless to be angry. She could only sigh and watch the carriages gradually go away. Sodeler noticed this scene. He coughed dryly and turned to walk away. He sighed in his heart that Roddy was really slow. He turned to the whispering Ruger and Carter beside him and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? Go, go, go. Noon training as usual. Those who are supposed to patrol, go on patrol." After the battle, the soldiers' spirits were already relaxed. Ruger and Carter laughed and walked away. The maids in the manor began to busy themselves. The scouts who delivered the information moved stacks of files over. The stewards who used to belong to Viscount Tranca were nervously lined up outside waiting to be summoned. They pointed at the head inserted in front of the manor door with fear. From the time they left Hollier City until now, they had finally gained a foothold. Perhaps this was the true meaning of several life and death battles. Sodeler sighed and turned to the living room. A few hundred meters away, Roddy was quietly looking at the mission bar. He rubbed his eyes, feeling a headache. The epic undead mission, the beastman's movement, the ownerless territory, and the time limit is only 150 days. Raising his head, he looked at the edge of the forest that was getting closer and closer. He listened to the bumpy road and the friction of the wheels, but he was even more distressed about the problem that he discovered after checking Akasha's status panel. Chapter 262. Iron Calendar, Year 588, 15th of November. There were 148 days until the end of the first phase of the Judgment of the Bone Throne mission. Snow the size of goose feathers fluttered in the air. The convoy escorting Roddy had been traveling in the forest for 3 days. At this point, they could already see the edge of the forest in the distance. The temperature outside had dropped to -5 degrees due to the heavy snow, but the carriage was still as warm as spring. An exquisite and warm little stove was placed in the center of the carriage. The lifelike carvings and gilding indicated that this unassuming stove was worth at least 50 gold coins. Roddy knew this number, but Natha, who sat opposite him, had no idea. To this wood elf, although she had tried her best to imagine and adapt to the human world, seeing such a luxurious scene still shocked her from the bottom of her heart. The entire carriage was like a luxurious palace. The hui shape was more than enough to seat 10 people. On the antique wooden shelves were a few bottles of red wine from a famous winery in the southern part of the kingdom. The floor was covered with a thick, handmade woolen carpet, and the soft cushions were embroidered with golden threads of a wolf's head. This indicated that this was an exclusive item of the Lucifron family. For lighting, the carriage boldly used a double-glazed strip window structure. Even if the sun was not bright, it still allowed the carriage to be filled with light. All these details made Natha, who had never left the Forest of Silence, feel that she was a country bumpkin. She never imagined that the nobles of the human world could be so luxurious. Thus, during the 3 days on the road, Natha was much more reserved than before. It could even be said that she did not move at all. Just how complicated was the human world? She blinked her large eyes and lifted her gaze slightly to look at Roddy sitting opposite her. She could not help but think of such a question in her heart. In the past few days, she had been recalling all the bits and pieces of her encounter with Roddy. The first time she met him, Natha felt that he was strong, but also strange. He could speak Elvish, and would always say some strange things. Later on, Roddy killed the bone-armored giant elephant, killed the executioner Kevin, killed the blightcaller Magda, and led a team to fight their way out of the encirclement of the nobles. All these events were enough to build up Roddy's image as a shining hero in the eyes of the commoners. But at this moment, Natha felt that this frowning young man did not seem any different from the first time she met him. He had always maintained a near non-existent presence, low-key and inconspicuous. For some reason, Nada felt that it was unfair to Roddy. After all his contributions, was he still an insignificant member of the human world? This is the first time you've been so far away from home, right? Just as she was feeling a little strange, Roddy's sudden words startled Natha. She hurriedly looked away and nodded. Yes. We'll be reaching Hollier in a while. There are some things I need to tell you in advance so that you can be mentally prepared. Roddy did not ask why Natha was staring at him. He just continued in a very formal manner. Hollier is the largest human city you will see. There will be many rules here, and there will be many people and things you will have to interact with. Before you make any decisions, you must ask me first. This way, you can avoid danger and unnecessary conflicts, understand? Yes. Remember to wear a mask and hood. Don't reveal your identity unless I allow it. Yes. Don't run around. I know you like to be clean, so I prepared a lot of spare clothes for you. When you need to wash them, just give them to the servants. You don't have to wash them secretly, okay? Yes. I got it. Natha blushed. She did not expect Roddy to notice her misophobia. However, she felt an inexplicable warmth from the bottom of her heart. Roddy did not say anything else after that. He frowned and continued to read the parchment. This scene had been repeating itself for the past 3 days. He had too many things to worry about. Even when he was in the same carriage with Natha, there was no ambiguous atmosphere. The pressure was too great, and he did not consider such things at all. Serene was originally here as well, but because he wanted to study leather armor, he was arranged to go to another carriage. The atmosphere fell silent again. However, today, Natha suddenly wanted to say something. She pursed her lips and hesitated for a moment. For the first time, she asked a question that had been on her mind for a long time. Teacher, do you have a high status among the humans? Her teacher was so powerful, so he must have a higher status than village head Broody. Roddy raised his head, a little surprised. However, he still spoke the truth, not high, or should I say, very low. I'm not even a noble. Why? Natha blinked, not believing Roddy's words at all. Because. Roddy opened his mouth and wanted to explain. However, he found that he could not find the right concept and entry point to explain. After thinking for a moment, he slowly said, "Status depends on whether others approve of you. If there are many people who approve of you, then your status will naturally belong to the high class." He pointed to himself. "For someone like me who no one knows, my status is naturally very low." Natha blinked and nodded, not really understanding. She felt a little down. She was usually very cold, but today she was a little talkative. It was probably because she was about to enter a big city that she had some expectations. She wanted to know what kind of person her teacher was. If he was extremely powerful, she would naturally feel a sense of satisfaction in her heart. For a young girl like Nada, this kind of thinking was inevitable. However, Roddy's answer clearly made her a little disappointed. The conversation between the two ended. Roddy lowered his head and continued to study the various arrangements he had to be busy with, while Natha tried hard to dispel the little bit of depression in her heart. 10 minutes later, the soldiers outside suddenly burst into cheers. The team had already walked out of the forest. Without the cover of the trees, they could see their destination, the towering city walls and the forest of buildings. The window was opened, and Natha looked at the miraculous buildings. The usual coldness on her face melted away like snow, leaving only curiosity and surprise that she had never shown before. Roddy looked at her delicate face and sighed in his heart. She was just a young girl after all. When they arrived at Hollier, Roddy could not help but think of Sally. How was that figure with long platinum hair doing? Was she doing well in the Holy Cathedral? As he was lost in thought, Roddy suddenly realized that the scene in front of him seemed to be a little different from what he had imagined. The snow was still falling, but there were more than 100 ceremonial troops armed with spears on both sides of the city gate. Their silver armor was engraved with the symbol of a rose and a cross, indicating that they were soldiers of the church's knights. The red ceremonial ribbons on their chests showed that this troop was an elite troop with extremely strong combat power. Using elite cavalry as a ceremonial troop, such a posture was only seen when they welcomed the Bishop Rubens. Could it be that the Bishop is visiting today? Just as Roddy was puzzled, he saw the 2 rows of ceremonial soldiers suddenly stand at attention and salute the carriage he was in. The carriage entered the city gate, and the formation of the Holy Cathedral soldiers in front of the window gradually turned into soldiers with the Lucifron family insignia. As the carriage moved forward, all the soldiers saluted the convoy. In the snowstorm, the soldiers did not leave after saluting. Instead, they slowly followed behind the procession. Whether it was the church's soldiers or Lucifron's private soldiers, they all stood in front of Roddy's carriage, protecting it in an orderly manner. At this moment, Roddy could finally confirm that this convoy was here to welcome him. But Roddy knew very well that even Bishop Rubens had never received such a solemn and grand reception. Obviously, this was the Dukes of Angmar and Bishop Benjamin expressing their gratitude and respect. And under such a formation, no matter how stupid Serene and Natha were, they could feel the true weight of Roddy in the entire Iferta territory. The most powerful noble Serene had seen in his life was Viscount Trenka, and he only saw him from afar. He did not even have the chance to get close to him. And now, he was desperately pinching his thighs. He was sitting on the carriage of the ducal palace, and he was being welcomed by the ducal palace's convoy and the Rose Cross sect. All of this was real. He never dreamed that these 2 forces that seemed to be above the clouds would actually send out the most spectacular welcoming party in the harsh conditions of the snowstorm. As for Natha, she immediately turned her head. Her originally worried face revealed a faint smile. She looked at Roddy and said word by word, "Teacher, did you just say that no one knows you and that your status is very low?" Roddy suddenly felt that his words were like shooting himself in the foot. And this was not the end. When the convoy reached the ducal palace, Natha saw the two figures standing outside the manor from afar. "Who is that?" "Ahem," Roddy coughed dryly and immediately got off the carriage. It was Duke and the bishop themselves. They personally stood outside the manor to welcome him. Such a gesture was unprecedented in the nobility's etiquette. It was impossible for Roddy not to feel touched. This was definitely a model example of being courteous to the wise. However, his biggest characteristic as an otaku was that he could suppress his emotional emotions almost as soon as they appeared. So, after his mind gradually calmed down, he quickly had doubts. Was it really a good thing to encounter something like this as soon as he returned to Hollier? His gaze swept across the manor again. There were many other nobles on both sides of the manor. They were obviously the influential class of Hollier. This made Roddy's smile slightly stiffen, and then he slowly let out a sigh of relief. So that was it. These two old fellows wanted to tie him to them completely. Putting up such a big show and even personally bringing countless people to welcome him was definitely not something that Roddy wanted to see. Because this was equivalent to exposing his original hidden identity to the public, and thrown directly into the countless eyes of countless people. To avoid disputes and trouble, Roddy only had one choice: stand in the light and form an alliance with Angmar and Benjamin. Roddy really did not expect that after fighting for his life outside and finally returning to the main city, he would fall into their trap the moment he entered the city. Chapter 263. In the snowstorm, the ducal palace was unusually quiet and solemn. When the holy guards and the private soldiers of the ducal palace escorted Roddy's team to the front of the mansion, the entire square was filled with people. As for the welcoming party, 7 to 8 barons and viscounts donned in thick cloaks stood beside the mansion expressionlessly, faintly highlighting the Dukes of Angmar and Bishop Benjamin in the middle. Since the two powerful elders had mobilized so many people, Roddy naturally could not wait for the carriage to stop in front of him before getting off. Although he felt dissatisfied and helpless, he had to choose an appropriate attitude to deal with such a show of extravagance. Roddy, whose political IQ was passable, jumped off the carriage from afar. While cursing the two old farts for scheming against him in his heart, he put on a flattered expression and greeted, "Lord Duke, Lord Bishop, I'm glad that I didn't disappoint you this time, but I really can't accept such courtesy." Roddy thought he would see a satisfied or even proud smile from the two old men, but when he got closer, he found that the Dukes of Angmar did not look well. His face was pale and his lips were purple. Although his eyes were still sharp, his eye bags were swollen. It was obvious that he was ill. Let's deal with it first. I'll explain to you tonight," Duke whispered to Roddy. He then smiled and said loudly, "The Lucifron family is fortunate to have a member like you. I have seen all your hard work. As the captain of my guards, you have contributed to the territory and the kingdom. You have not let me down." Roddy immediately realized that Angmar's gesture was for the nobles to see. Although he did not know how he had become the captain of the guards, he still made a prompt decision. He respectfully bowed and whispered through his teeth, "What do you want me to do? I'll be fine after this meal." After Bishop Benjamin finished his sentence, he raised his hand and released a holy light spell. With a pious expression, he said, "Captain Roddy led the team to fight bravely and killed Magda the Witherer. His meritorious service is outstanding and he has cleared another evil existence from the world for the Rose Cross." As he spoke, he took out a piece of parchment that emanated a holy aura. There were 2 wax seals on the parchment, which meant that it was an oracle from the Rose Cross Cathedral. The nobles who were looking at Roddy with disdain slightly changed their expressions. They couldn't help but straighten their bodies. From today onwards, Captain Roddy will forever be a friend of Rose Cross. The imperial edict was not limited to that short sentence. However, the meaning of the edict was enough to make the ordinary nobles gasp. With such an official imperial edict, Rhodey would have the backing of the Rose Cross. In the midst of the discussion, the Dukes of Angmar coughed a few times and announced that everyone would attend the banquet. To Roddy, it was not difficult to wear a fake mask and talk nonsense with these nobles for 2 hours. He was more concerned about the specific reason that the two old men told him. Could it be that they had other difficulties? The luxurious banquet ended in a hurry after 2 hours because the Dukes of Angmar was not feeling well. The nobles expressed their understanding and politely bid farewell to Roddy. The ducal palace finally quieted down. Serene and Natha did not have the right to attend the banquet, but Roddy was not worried about their treatment. He believed that Angmar would not mistreat his people. After the last baron left the dining hall, Roddy was quickly led by a maid to the spacious study on the second floor of the mansion. Once again, he met the Dukes of Angmar and Bishop Benjamin, and this time it was a candid treatment. At this time, the atmosphere in the study was not as festive as at the dining table. The Dukes of Angmar's cough was very ear-piercing, and Bishop Benjamin's face was slightly worried. When he saw Roddy coming in, he raised his hand and handed the precious and sacred Holy Edict to Roddy with both hands. He said, "The main purpose of the banquet in the afternoon was to convey a kind of attitude to the outside world, and at the same time to confirm your identity. There is a reason for this, and I did not inform you in time. I hope you can listen to a few words of explanation from Angmar." This was actually very polite words. The difference in status between Roddy and Bishop Benjamin was like the clouds and the mud, but Bishop Benjamin put himself on the same level as Roddy. Of course, Roddy understood the gravity of the situation. He quickly took the Holy Edict and said, "I'm just a little surprised, and I hope to understand what happened as soon as possible." Cough, cough. The maid heard the coughing and quickly brought hot water for Duke. But after Angmar grabbed the cup, he waved his hand and said, "You can leave first." When the door closed, Angmar did not bother with small talk and said to Roddy directly, "The deaths of Magda and Ansadin are public information, but no one knows that you were the one who did it. I also tried to arrange people to spread some information to mislead and downplay your existence. But a few days ago, something unexpected happened. Someone made your identity public." "Public? Mine?" Roddy was very surprised, and his eyebrows immediately raised. "What happened? I can't find out. That is what I feel is troublesome." Angmar shook his head, and after trying to calm his breathing he continued, "The news suddenly appeared, and some of the things you have done in the past were made public. Your position, your current territory location, how many heretics you have killed, and so on. This information immediately made you wanted by the Viper Cross. In order to protect you, we had to do this." These words made Roddy frown deeply. This kind of explanation barely satisfied him, but he still felt a little unhappy, because now he was tied to the Rose Cross and the Lucifron family. Not only did he have to bear the risk of being wanted by the Viper Cross, but he also had to bear the risk of being attacked by the enemies behind these two forces. There were good and bad results like this. Roddy was silent for a moment. He did not really want to speak, but to avoid the awkwardness, he lowered his head and looked at the Holy Edict. But after that, the notification that jumped in front of him made Roddy's eyes light up. This piece of parchment that was personally issued by the Pope actually gave Roddy a new title. Devout Rose Cross reputation automatically increased to Reverence. When receiving divine blessings, the buff increased by 30%, remains the same after switching. Obviously, Roddy's killing of the Blightcaller, Magda and Ansadin, the two archenemies of the undead, had done a great service for the Church. The destruction of the executioner Kevin was also a great achievement. All in all, this title could be said to have been earned with a sword and an arrow. There was no luck at all. A 30% buff was definitely a huge number. If it was the plus 120 strength blessing of power, with this title, the effect could be increased to plus 156 strength. And a priest who specialized in the buff attribute could usually farm 5 to 8 similar buff. If he had this title and farmed all the buffs, his strength might even double. The most powerful thing is that the buff from the devout title will not disappear after switching titles. Activating the devout title, buffing the buff and switching to the last Witcher a title, the additional 30% buff will not be reduced by a single bit. It was worth it. Roddy was relieved. He raised his head and saw the Dukes of Angmar coughing violently with blood seeping out of his fingers. He immediately realized that Duke's illness might not be that simple. He immediately looked at Benjamin who was beside him, but the bishop shook his head. He has used too many divine spells, it's no longer effective. This sentence made Roddy squint his eyes. The Dukes of Angmar slowed down and his body trembled. He looked up and said word by word, "I know you still have resentment in your heart. To be honest, giving you the title of guard captain is because of my selfishness. If the war really comes as you said, I only hope that you can use the resources of this family to protect Sally and not let her suffer." Helping Sally, and not the Dukes of Angmar, this was already an obvious last words. Humans are selfish, but was Angmar doing this selfish or selfless? Roddy could not come up with a definition at the moment, but he felt that such a father should be worthy of his respect. Anyway, he did not plan to continue hiding behind the scenes. Such an unforeseen event was not something that could not be dealt with. Roddy slowly exhaled, and the last trace of dissatisfaction in his heart disappeared. Seeing Duke using a handkerchief to wipe the blood, he asked, "Have you taken the potion?" "I drank a dozen of the mid-level healing potion, but it's no longer effective." Benjamin's voice was heavy, and it was obvious that he no longer had any hope for the potion. "There are some rare potions in Ansadin's inheritance. I'll send someone to look for them, maybe. It can delay the time for a while." Roddy was speaking the truth. Although the potions in the game were powerful, the law of aging, sickness, and death could not be ignored. The Dukes of Angmar had been tormented by the soul extraction potion for 5 years, and his body was like a candle in the wind. The only reason he could hold on until now was because he had a good foundation. If he was an ordinary person, he would have died long ago. What was tormenting Angmar was his body's weakness and serious illness. If he remembered correctly, Roddy did have a potion that could slow down the symptoms. Although it could not be cured, it could ensure that Angmar could hold on for a while longer. How long? Ansadin raised his head slightly. It should be able to last through the winter. Roddy did not ask if he wanted it, and said directly, "Send someone to Pear Hill now, it should be here in a week." Angmar nodded silently, and did not say any polite words such as, "Thank you." The atmosphere was a little silent. He thought for a while and said, "I received a letter from Bishop Rubens the day before yesterday. It's a notice of a change in position. Next spring, I will be promoted to the diocese's archbishop." Iferta diocese? Roddy raised his head slightly, recalled for a while, and corrected himself. No, it should be Bodog diocese. Benjamin looked at Roddy with some surprise and nodded. It's Bodog diocese. Congratulations, Lord Bishop. In another 5 years, you may be able to take over Lord Rubens's position. Chapter 264. The Diocese of Bodog was located in the middle west of the kingdom, adjacent to Ifta, and further away from the royal family. In Roddy's memory, this diocese was the place where the rebel army rose after the Orc invasion. Surrounded by mountains and 2 rivers as a barrier, The core territory of the diocese was easy to defend and difficult to attack due to its natural environment. Back then, it was here that Sodeler rose in revolt, leading the civilians who had nowhere else to retreat on the road to resist the orcs. If war broke out, Bishop Benjamin would definitely be Roddy's main support in the Rose Cross. This way, the Diocese of Bodog could be connected to Ifta, effectively expanding its strategic depth. Roddy would never think that he would win every battle. He was very clear about the significance of strategic depth in war. During the Blitzkrieg in World War II, Poland did not have enough strategic depth. It only lasted for 9 days before the German army attacked Warsaw. The entire country was directly destroyed by the overwhelming enemy, and had no choice but to sign a surrender agreement after 28 days. Roddy did not want the Kingdom of Karen to suffer the same fate. The Diocese of Bodog is a good place. Roddy and the bishop continued to chat for a while. Benjamin knew that it was time for him to leave, so he politely said goodbye. When only Roddy and Angmar were left in the study, the old and the young naturally talked about the orcs. I saw the news from Sora Outpost. The reason why the orcs appeared there is a little strange. I need more information to make a judgment. The Dukes of Angmar raised his hand and pointed at the desk. His voice was weak. Deploy the troops on the map first. This is about all I can do. Roddy picked up the map and found that the direction of the outposts, fortresses and defense lines were marked out. This proved that the Duke had used almost all the resources in his hands on the prevention of war. This more or less moved Roddy. After all, this meant that the Duke had complete trust in him. He could imagine that if it were any other noble, even if they believed that the orcs would invade, they would not be able to really put in so much effort to prevent it. This was the true meaning of not suspecting people. Roddy slowly took a deep breath and quickly got rid of his emotions. Trust represented the recognition of strength. He understood that he was not here to be a freeloader. He carefully looked at the map and narrowed his eyes. I am not sure if it is just an illusion, but the orcs appeared at Sora Outpost. It seems like they are here to defend a few key areas. The Great Plains of Nehemia is a natural barrier. Back then, Great Emperor Kong En had chased them there so that the kingdom would have the upper hand. Speaking of which, as the Duke of the Borders, my duty is to defend against foreign enemies. But now I realize that all these years there are too many things that I have not done properly. The Dukes of Angmar's tone was filled with self-blame. His face had aged due to his illness, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He ran his finger across a few areas and sighed. There are many loopholes in the defense here, but I've been working hard to fix them. Sora Outpost is the one with the biggest loophole because it's a special area. A no-man's land often means chaos and trouble. Roddy looked at the intersection of the lines on the map. Sora Outpost was built on the border of the Kingdom of Karen. Standing there and looking northwest, the Gondola Mountains of Tasman were on the left, the Great Plains of Nehemia on the right, and the Kingdom of Karen on the back. It was in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest supply station was more than 100 kilometers away. It was a desolate area that looked like an isolated island. I've invested the most resources in Sora Outpost, but the results are not good. Recently, there have been reports of soldiers dying in battle. Obviously, the exploration there is not going well. Duke's voice was tinged with worry. There is too little useful information. The terrain there is complicated, and there are more monsters than in any forest. It's really a headache. Roddy understood the difficulties involved, but he did not have the intention to make the trip himself. He had a lot of things to do. If he were to do the work of a soldier now, it would be a waste of his energy. Then we can only wait for new information. This can't be rushed. The important thing is, can the logistics keep up? It's a little difficult. The territory's revenue is not very optimistic. Angmar did not give a specific figure, but he was being honest. However, Roddy obviously had a lot to say about this problem. I may have a suitable solution for the financial side. War cost money, and it was more expensive than anything else. The territory had not made much profit in the past few years, and it was inevitable that the territory would be financially strapped if they suddenly started this plan. Angmar had thought of many ways and was even prepared to raise the tax rate, but it was like drinking poison to quench one's thirst. He could not find a real solution. So after hearing Roddy's words, Angmar looked up and asked incredulously, "You really have a solution?" At this moment, Roddy involuntarily activated the bluff mode. He recalled the people who promoted Amway products in his memory. He coughed and said, "Lord Duke, have you heard of the Wood Elves?" While Roddy and Angmar were discussing the business problems of Elsa Village, Serene and Natha had been settled in the luxurious guest rooms of the ducal palace. Although Serene was a human and Natha was a wood elf, and they grew up in very different environments, they had the same reaction when they were in this mansion that had accumulated countless wealth and was built more than 200 years ago. Shock. Serene had never been to a big noble's mansion before today. When the maidservant led him into the warm and comfortable guest room, he realized that his imagination of a noble's mansion in the past was simply laughable. It was not like the luxurious and eye-catching buildings of the upstart gentry, which were inlaid with gold and silver and wished that the floor could be paved with gold bricks. Everything in the Duke's mansion seemed to be quietly hiding the word heritage under the surface. Serene lifted his foot and stepped on the carpet. The material was soft, the craftsmanship was exquisite, and it emitted a faint fragrance. The furniture in front of him was simple and exquisite, and the layout was comfortable. The surface of the solid wood was extremely smooth. After years of use and maintenance, the simple yet weathered atmosphere was far more intoxicating than gold. The candlesticks were made of silver, and the armchair in front of the fireplace was probably 3 or 4 times older than Serene. Almost every piece of furniture and decoration was carved by top masters. Ordinary people might think that they were beautiful, but they didn't know that the value of the furniture itself had already exceeded the value of gold of the same volume. Sitting here, Serene couldn't help but feel the majesty of a big family that had lasted for hundreds of years. There was an inexplicable pressure in his heart. Even if the maidservant humbly provided various services for him, he still couldn't really relax. The strength that Roddy showed now was already so amazing. Then in the future, what kind of changes would he bring? Great confusion filled Serene's mind, but after a long time, an inexplicable fighting spirit and expectation rose up. He suddenly realized that what was waiting for him next might be a future that he had never imagined. From this moment on, Serene had no other thoughts and completely became a member of Roddy's camp. In another guest room, Natha stood in an antique room, looking at everything around her at a loss. Compared to the simple and crude Elsa village, everything in front of her was undoubtedly the other extreme. After the maidservant left, the indifference on Natha's face gradually faded, replaced by undisguised astonishment. Unlike Serene's inferiority complex, due to his family background, Natha's astonishment this time came from the curiosity buried deep in her heart. She looked left and right and raised her hand to touch it. However, she remembered what Roddy had said to her. Her fingers, which were reaching for the quill, froze in the air. She then reluctantly withdrew her hand. "If I break it, my teacher will definitely scold me." After repeating this to herself several times, Natha suppressed the little impulse. After thinking for a while, she simply put her hands behind her back and strolled back and forth in the room. If someone could see her curious baby appearance at this moment, he or she would probably think that she was a completely different person from the indifferent Natha in the past. Cushions embroidered with wolf heads, wooden pillars carved with human stories, genuine, excellent long swords on the weapons rack. Whenever she found something new, Natha would put her delicate face close to it, carefully scrutinize it, sniff it, and then raise her head, blinking her big eyes, looking for the next target. Even she herself did not realize that she had subconsciously removed her fear and vigilance towards the human world. Sometimes she even forgot the reason why she followed Roddy in the first place. Everyone was changing. Natha originally thought that she should put all her energy into studying archery, but now studying the strange things of human beings seemed to be far more interesting than archery. Is this the big city of human beings that teacher mentioned? It's really spectacular, such a high city wall, it's difficult to even climb up, and those houses with pointed roofs are even taller than the tallest trees in the forest. Are they all built by humans? And their clothes are so beautiful. In Natha's eyes, even the maid who sent her here, that kind of lace dress was a novelty that made her envious. It seemed that women naturally liked beautiful clothes regardless of race. Because of the drastic change of environment, Natha was as cold as an iceberg in the past, finally caused the deeply buried thoughts in her heart to gradually surface. I really don't know what I would look like in that kind of dress. Would it look good? But if I do that, teacher will probably scold me. Thinking of Roddy's warning to her, Natha sighed slightly. Looking at the spacious and comfortable big bed, she felt that directly going to sleep seemed to be the best choice. But Natha, who had a serious mysophobia, would definitely not go to sleep directly. She looked at the room in the guest room that led to other rooms, gritted her teeth, and finally made up her mind to open the door, and she did find what she needed. It was a marble bathtub that was heated by a magic circle, and the water was sprinkled with flower petals. Chapter 265. The night grew darker. The conversation with the Dukes of Angmar lasted for half an hour. Knowing that the old man was weak and needed rest, Roddy politely excused himself. When he left the room, he could see that Angmar was in a better mood. Obviously, his plan about Ursa village had worked. Although the economic level of Ifta territory was above average in the kingdom, in the eyes of a modern person like Roddy, it had not completely broken away from the primitive stage of natural economy. The aristocrats lived a luxurious life because they exploited the lower classes to the extreme. In terms of the overall economic level, there was really nothing to write home about. To make an extreme comparison, in the modern society that Roddy lived in before his time travel, as long as one was willing to work hard, one could still find a decent job to support his family. If there was a good opportunity, becoming rich was nothing new. Even if one worked as a brickworker, the salary was enough to eat and drink. But in this era, the fate of the peasants at the bottom was extremely miserable. Even if the taxes were light, they could not earn much money in a year. They might not even have the chance to leave their village for the rest of their lives. As for becoming rich and living a comfortable life, it was basically a pipe dream. High-profit industries such as mills, breweries, bakeries, and pigeon houses were all monopolized by the aristocrat. Monopoly meant huge profits, but these profits were still not enough in the face of the sudden increase in military expenses. At this time, the sudden appearance of Ursa village was definitely a surprise. The difference between Earthbreaker and the real medieval world was that it had the concept of magic and magical beasts. In addition to providing food, herbs, and wood, the forest resources actually made a lot more profit than most other basic industries. If Ursa village could become a harbor for humans in the Forest of Silent Whispers, it would be equivalent to opening the door of this forest to Ifta territory. Optimizing the elven villages, setting up resting places for mercenaries and adventurers, opening up trade channels, collecting taxes, handling fees, transaction fees, and so on, as well as monopolizing the right to buy and sell alcohol. By doing all this, in less than half a year, the problem of military expenses would be effectively alleviated. This plan made the Dukes of Angmar very excited. He originally thought that the territory would be dragged down by the war, but the sudden turn of events gave him hope. Although Roddy had surprised him time and time again, and he could always defeat and kill enemies. Now that it involved the economic and political aspects, Angmar could not help but look up to him again. You have brought great benefits to the village. I think even the smartest aristocrat in the kingdom can't compare to you. The Dukes of Angmar sighed. The more he looked at Roddy, the more he liked him. Before Roddy left, he did not forget to take out a letter and said, "This is a letter from Sally." The wax seal was not opened. Obviously, the Dukes of Angmar respected privacy. This also meant that he did not oppose the relationship between Roddy and Sally. In this era, the meaning of such an attitude could not be clearer. After leaving the Duke's study, Roddy could not help but recall the platinum-haired girl. When they met at the border, she confidently rode on a horse. When she killed Francis with her own hands, she was ruthless. When they parted, she was reluctant and resolute. Roddy held the letter in his hand and suddenly found himself looking forward to the contents inside. How is she doing over there? Has she been wronged? But this kind of emotion soon dissipated. Roddy was a little confused. He felt that his thoughts were not quite right. Why did he have this kind of feeling? Did he really have some improper thoughts about her? Shaking his head, he felt that this should be the concern of an ordinary friend. As for Naife, after finishing the deployment, I will go to Prague village. The village where the little girl lived was more than 1,000 kilometers away from here, but Roddy still decided to find a chance to go there. Of course, the prerequisite was to complete the first step of Judgment of the Bone Throne. He lowered his head and opened the mission panel. The conversation with the two old men, Benjamin and Angmar, meant that the last step of all the previous missions had been completed. So, other than the experience gained from killing Ansadin and the others, the completion of this series of missions had once again provided an astronomical amount of experience for Roddy. Roddy scrolled through the records and counted. There were 4 to 5 missions related to Ansadin, Magda, and Earl Owen, which added up to a total of 180,000 experience points. In total, he had over 200,000 EXP remaining. However, due to the increase in his level, his EXP requirement had also increased. Glancing at his EXP bar, Roddy discovered that he was only 350 EXP away from reaching the next level. That's it. I'll find a mission tomorrow to gather the experience points. Roddy needed to level up as soon as possible. The higher his current level, the better the quality of the leather armor he made. Of course, the wrist guard that he showed Serene was for Natha, and it required a base level of 9. It was already dark outside the window, but it was only 8:30 at night. Roddy thought for a moment and felt that he should talk to Serene and Nada, so he asked the maidservant where they were staying. 2 minutes later, Roddy saw Serene, who was focused on studying the manuscript. Although Serene was tired after a few days of traveling, he did not seem to care. When he noticed that Roddy had come to see him, he began to discuss leather-making techniques with Roddy energetically. Naturally, Roddy was not interested in teaching him now. After a few words, he left. After walking out of the guest room, he asked about Natha's room. Then he walked to the guest room and gently knocked on the wooden door, **********, 4 wood elves. Bathing usually did not take too much time. In Aisha village, Natha's bathing place was a stream not far from the village. Because it was an underground spring, the temperature of the stream was always a bit cold. It was fine in summer, but in late autumn, winter, and early spring, most wood elves would not choose to bathe there. However, Natha, who was obsessed with cleanliness, was an exception. As long as the stream did not freeze, she would still use the bone-chilling water to clean her body. This was a typical case of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Natha only came into contact with the bathtub after arriving at Kiger Town. She also understood how to use it after listening to Roddy's explanation, so she was not confused about the purpose of the bathroom in front of her. The polished surface of the marble bathtub glowed with a soft luster. Magic crystal was placed on the heating device driven by a magic circle, and the water temperature was always constant. Natha reached out to touch the flower petals in the bathtub. She could not figure out where the flower petals in the bathtub came from. In her memory, these flowers would only bloom in summer, and there was not even a shadow of them in the wild at this time. Humans are really amazing. Natha could only sigh. Then, she took off her slightly heavy leather armor and reached out to test the water temperature. After a moment of hesitation, she slowly walked into the large bathtub naked. Before this, Natha had always taken cold baths. So, when the warm water slowly wrapped around her body, the comfort was completely unprecedented for this wood elf. She could not help but moan, and then immediately shut her mouth. Her eyes were wide open, and she wanted to get up, but because of the numbness in her body, she could not help but continue to immerse herself in the bathtub. After a long while, Natha, who had adapted to the water temperature, slowly exhaled. When her tense body relaxed, she looked at the dome with exquisite murals and magic lights above her. She murmured, "Is this the life of a human noble?" There was no doubt that all this had a great impact on Natha. Compared to Urza village, the material here was like heaven. She did not have to worry about magical beasts here, nor did she have to worry about the cold stream hurting her body. She only needed to relax and enjoy. The hot bath was extremely relaxing for the body. Coupled with the fatigue brought by the previous journey, Natha found that her eyelids soon began to droop. She wanted to get up, but she was reluctant to leave this comfortable feeling, and unconsciously closed her eyes. Knock, knock. When there was a knock on the door, Natha, who was already sound asleep, did not notice it at all. Roddy stood outside the guest room, and his fingers knocked on the old wooden door again. The slightly muffled sound was not small. After waiting for half a minute, Roddy looked around to make sure that he did not knock on the wrong door. The maid said that Natha really lived here. Could it be that she ran away to somewhere else? This idea was quickly rejected. Roddy could not find a reason for Natha to do so. According to her usual routine, this was not the time for Natha to sleep. He twisted the handle, and the door opened easily. Instead of pushing the door open, Roddy asked through the gap, "Natha, are you inside?" There was no response. Roddy frowned and pushed the door open. In his vision, Natha's cloak was hung on the clothes rack, and the short bow was placed on the weapons rack. The room was neat and tidy, and there was no trace of a battle. Strange, according to Roddy's understanding, the sound of him opening the door could even wake Natha up. This was a warrior's instinct, so he directly concluded that Natha was not in this guest room. If she was not here, then where could she have gone? Roddy strode to the room on the left, and pushed the door open without thinking. He did not understand the layout of the guest room in the ducal palace, so he did not notice that it was a bathroom. Then, Natha, who was finally awakened by the footsteps, sat in the bathtub and met Roddy face to face. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Roddy's left hand was still on the door handle, and his eyes quickly swept across everything in the room. It seemed that his focus was not on Natha, who was in the middle of the bathtub. Natha, who was awakened, instinctively sat up straight. Amidst the splashing sound of water, the naked Natha's upper body was exposed to the air. Her skin, which was fairer than a human's, looked even more delicate under the illumination of the magic light. Her wet long hair hung on both sides of her cheeks, and her pair of big eyes opened in confusion as if she had not figured out where she was. A second later, their eyes finally met. Roddy and Natha froze at the same time and stared blankly at each other. For a moment, neither could react to what had happened. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.